A man was buried alive beneath a mountain, and no one ever found his bones. This is the story of Darth Andeddu, the first immortal king, the Sith who refused to die. Before there were Jedi, before there was a republic, before the Force had a name, there was Prakith. A world of broken storms and violent stone, isolated deep within the black gravity wells of the deep core, where maps turned to ash and explorers never returned. The locals called it cursed, haunted, a planet that whispered back when spoken to. They believed in one truth, that the body was weak, but the soul could be taught to remain. This is where he was born. No one remembers the name given to him. It has been erased from history. What remains are fragments etched in obsidian tablets, in blood-written scrolls, in tomb walls worn smooth by time. They speak of a boy born in the shadow of the throne of bones, a natural mountain fortress carved by heat and death, used by the ancients to bury kings too feared to be cremated. The boy did not cry when born. He stared, and they say the midwife went blind 3 days later. The villagers feared him, not because of what he did, but because of what he didn't. He didn't sleep. He didn't bleed. He didn't forget. He began to speak in a tongue no one taught him, a language buried since the Rakatan Wars, guttural, twisted, dry like rusted iron. The priests of the hollow flame called it a sign of corruption. They came with blades and fire. None of them left. What happened in the caves beneath the mountain was never spoken of. But when the boy emerged, his eyes glowed faintly, and the ground trembled beneath his feet. He was no longer a child, and no one dared stop him. The crown he took wasn't forged, it was inherited from the silence that followed. One by one, the elders bowed. One by one, the doubters vanished. And in time, a king ruled Prakith. Not with kindness, not with justice, but with stillness, with fear. His laws were simple: obey or disappear. Andeddu did not smile. He did not punish. He did not speak more than was needed. But when he did, it echoed. It was said that his words carried into dreams, that those who plotted against him would hear a voice the night before, a whisper that told them where their bones would rest. But most did not resist, because he gave them peace. No war, no famine, no invasion dared enter Prakith while he reigned, and so they built temples, and fed the flame that bore his name. And still, he did not age. Decades passed. The sons of his first gods grew old. Their grandsons were buried beneath the city, but Andeddu remained unchanged. His skin did not wrinkle. His hands did not slow. He spoke with the same cold breath, stood with the same posture, and watched with the same unblinking eyes. The whispers began again. Some said he had died and returned. Others believed he was never alive to begin with. But the cults, the ones hidden in the old cities, they knew. He had found something. Something beneath the mountain. A secret buried by time and protected by pain. Not a weapon, not a throne. A path. The beginning of a ritual older than the Jedi. A belief that death was not real, that the soul could be chained, that if one had the will, the body could become irrelevant. He called it essence transference. But the people never heard that name. They only saw a king who would not die, who no longer slept, who no longer blinked. And when lightning struck the mountain and fire poured through the mines, they saw him walk through the flame untouched. He was not a man anymore. He was something worse. And it was only the beginning. He called himself king. But Prakith called him something else. the tyrant of bone and flame. His rule began in silence. No declaration, no ceremony. The people awoke one morning to find the banners changed, the guards replaced, and the old nobles gone. The mountain fortress became his palace, the caverns beneath it his temple, and the air once filled with the chants of the hollow flame turned cold and hollow. For years, no one saw him outside the palace walls. They said he sat in the dark, studying scrolls written in languages older than the stars, languages that burned the eyes of those who tried to read them. Servants claimed that he no longer ate, that he drank nothing but black water from the veins of the mountain, that the torches inside his halls never needed to be lit, because something in the stone glowed when he walked past. He ruled through fear, but not through chaos. His orders were precise, his punishments exact. A whisper of rebellion was enough to make an entire family vanish. Yet there was no madness in it. Only purpose. The king sought something not power, not gold, not war. Something quieter, something eternal. The old gods of Prakith had long been forgotten, buried under centuries of ash and disbelief. But in the king's court, their names returned, etched into his throne, burned into the walls. He spoke to no one, but sometimes those passing the great hall would hear him muttering as if reciting to unseen figures, or answering questions that were never asked aloud. They say one night, the miners uncovered a door. It wasn't carved, it wasn't built, it was grown. A solid slab of bone fused with the mountain itself, sealed with runes that pulsed faintly like living veins. The workers fled. But the king came alone, descending with a torch that gave off no smoke. He placed his hand upon the door, and it opened, not outward, inward, like something was breathing on the other side. He entered, and for 3 days, no sound came from the mountain. When he returned, his eyes were black. From that day on, the storms above Prakith never stopped. Red lightning split the skies, and the rivers boiled where they touched the cliffs. The people built shrines out of fear, offering food and blood to appease the wrath they believed their king had awakened. But Andeddu was calm, unmoved. He walked among the altars and told them not to fear. He said the mountain was alive, and now, so was he. He spoke of a power that connected all things, not light, not dark, a current that could be bent by will, that the spirit could command the flesh, that the dead could be recalled from the void. Few understood, fewer still believed, but none dared to question. Then came the first miracle. A noble who had defied him publicly was executed. His body burned before the city. 3 days later, the noble returned silent, walking, eyes dim and gray. He bowed before the king and fell lifeless once more. No one spoke after that. The cult began soon after. Priests wearing hollow masks, their tongues cut, their robes dyed in ash. They preached that death was not the end, that their king was proof. They built fires that never went out, flames that burned blue beneath the palace. They called it the Undying Flame. Those who entered the flame and survived became his gods. Those who didn't became offerings. And the king watched, not with cruelty, but with fascination, as if each scream brought him closer to understanding what waited beyond life. Centuries later, the Sith would call it sorcery, but on Prakith, it was called faith. And for a time, faith was enough to keep the world quiet. Until the world remembered how to scream. No war ever came to Prakith. The galaxy burned in distant systems. Jedi and Sith clashed on worlds the people would never see. Empires rose and fell like tides, but on Prakith, nothing changed. The silence endured. The king endured. Andeddu had ruled for so long, his name no longer meant anything. He was simply the king, the Undying, the voice of the mountain. His face never changed, his voice never aged. Decades passed like dust, generations were born beneath his reign, and none of them remembered a time without him. His city no longer belonged to the people, it belonged to the dead. The palace grew downward, not upward. Beneath the mountain, the king carved halls of bone and stone, chambers filled with flame and silence. Some said he walked among the corpses of his ancestors, speaking to them. Others believed he no longer walked at all, that he floated just above the ground, untethered by weight or breath. Visitors rarely came, but when they did, they left changed. The king welcomed no guests unless summoned. Merchants spoke of an audience chamber lined with statues too lifelike to be stone. Some even swore the statues moved when no one looked. He had no court, no council, no heirs, only servants. They were not permitted to speak. The king did not tolerate questions. He did not issue proclamations. His will was known without words. A glance, a gesture, a whisper, and still the people obeyed. Not because of love, not even fear, but because the silence was safer than resistance. Because even the bravest had forgotten what it meant to live without him. He had become part of the planet itself, part of its gravity, its breath, its curse. And there were signs that he was changing. His skin grew paler, stretched tighter, like stone under pressure. His veins no longer carried blood. His eyes had no light in them, only depth. He moved slowly, but never tired, never stumbled. He no longer wore robes of silk, but layers of shadow-dyed fabric, etched with runes that pulsed when touched. He stopped speaking altogether. The cult grew bolder in his silence. They spread into the outer towns, carrying ashes from the palace flame. They preached to the children, offering gifts to families willing to give up their names. The cult promised eternal life, but not in the way most hoped. They spoke of memory, of identity, of binding the soul to a name so strongly that death could not take it. But even as his worshippers multiplied, something else began to take shape. Doubt. Not from outsiders, from within. His guards, his followers, his people. They began to wonder not if he was powerful, but if he was still sane. There were whispers that the king had stopped eating entirely, that his reflection no longer appeared in water, that when his robes were removed, there was no body beneath, only bones suspended in place by will. Some believed he had already died, and simply refused to admit it. Andeddu knew. He always knew. The silence grew heavier. The executions stopped. The cult became more secretive. The palace sealed its gates. And the king turned inward. He stopped appearing in the city. He stopped summoning servants. He stopped responding altogether. For months, there was no sound from the mountain, no smoke from its towers. The sky remained dark. And then one day, a scream. One long, terrible sound, not from a person, but from the mountain itself. A deep, cracking wail that split the sky and knocked statues from their pedestals. The flame towers crumbled. The outer walls shattered. When the dust settled, the palace doors were open, but the throne was empty. He was gone. No body, no guards, no trail, no blood, just silence. The city waited, for days, for weeks, for years. But the king never returned. Only the fear remained. And in the silence he left behind, something else began to grow. They believed he was dead. The mountain had swallowed kings before. It was not new. The cult whispered that it was planned, that their lord had passed into the spirit realm to complete his work. The miners said he had gone mad and sealed himself inside. The children of Prakith said nothing at all. For the first time in centuries, the wind moved freely through the city. The black banners were taken down. The flames were extinguished, and the people began to speak again. Quietly, cautiously, but they spoke. They spoke of the king's final years, of the way his eyes had faded, the stillness in his hands, the way his words, when he still used them, no longer sounded human. They remembered how cold the throne room had become, how the walls no longer echoed with voices, how the mountain itself had begun to change. It wasn't grief, it wasn't anger. What they felt was confusion. Because when a man dies, there is a body, there is mourning, there is closure. But the king left none of these. He had simply vanished. And so they searched. First the priests, then the guards, then the families of those taken by the cult. They entered the palace in groups, carrying torches and prayers. They found endless tunnels, chambers that twisted beneath the surface like veins, halls of mirrors, rooms of dried blood, walls covered in names that no longer matched any living tongue. But no sign of the king. In the deepest chamber, they found his throne. It was not made of gold or stone. It was made of skulls, human, alien, some still fresh. And in its center, a hollow space empty, as if something had once sat there and left. Beside the throne was a single artifact, a cube of dark metal marked with red lines that moved when no one was looking. It pulsed softly, waiting. They sealed it away. The High Council of Prakith declared a new age. The cult was disbanded. The mountain was closed. The city would be ruled by reason, by law, by life. But they were wrong. Because the king was not dead. He had not perished. He had not surrendered. He had transferred. Not his body, his essence. The ritual he had spent decades preparing, studying the writings of the Rakata, the holocrons of the dark priests, the lost fragments of Sith sorcery it had worked. He had become what he always believed he could be. A being of will, of thought, of hate. He was no longer bound to his flesh. He was the whisper in the dark corridors, the shadow behind the torchlight, the voice inside the minds of those who stepped too close to the throne. He had become his name, Andeddu, the one who will not cease. His holocron remained sealed, but not dormant. Over centuries, it passed between hands. Some scholars, some fools, some Sith. All of them touched it, and all of them heard the voice. Some ran, some screamed, some tried to destroy it. None succeeded, because he was inside, waiting, watching, listening, teaching. And through the dark teachings of that holocron, Andeddu survived. He taught the doctrine of immortality to those who dared to open the cube. He showed them the path to cheat death, not with hope, but with domination. Not through peace, but through pain. Many went mad, a few endured, but all who followed him learned the same truth. That death was not real. It was only weakness, and weakness could be erased. In time, his teachings would pass to Sith Lords who changed the galaxy. Darth Bane, Darth Krayt, Wyerlok. Each would feel his influence. Each would hear his voice. Each would try to silence him. But the grave could not hold him. It never had. Because he was never buried. Only waiting. He was never gone. While the world above moved on, while statues were pulled down and silence returned to the cities of Prakith. Darth Andeddu had gone deeper, into stone, into memory, into something the Force had tried to forget. He had left behind his throne and his people, but not his purpose. There was a chamber beneath the palace, not carved by tools, not marked on any map. It was older than the mountain itself, a vault of Rakatan origin, built when the Infinite Empire still ruled the stars through pain. Most who stumbled upon it died, their minds unraveled, their bodies withered. The Force did not flow cleanly here. It twisted. Andeddu entered alone. For days, nothing came from the depths. But he was not lost, he was listening. The Rakata had once called it a soul engine, a relic designed to bind essence to flesh, to trap the spirit inside a shell that could be replaced again and again. The Jedi considered such things myth. The Sith called it a weapon, and Andeddu saw it for what it truly was. A key. He stayed there for years. No fire, no food, no time. Just the slow unraveling of everything he once believed. He had studied Sith alchemy. He had pored over the tomes of Sorcerer's sin. He knew how to bend flesh, to break spirit, to twist the will of others. But this was not about others. This was about the self. How to preserve it, how to fracture it, displace it, and hide it within a shell that could not rot. The machine whispered to him. Not with words, but through dreams, through pulses in the Force, visions of bodies burned, minds shattered, spirits torn apart and stitched back together. The Rakata had nearly destroyed themselves trying to use it. Andeddu learned from their mistakes. He began experimenting, first with animals, then with prisoners, then with his own loyal followers, the ones who would have gladly died for him. He killed them gently. He tried to pull their spirits back, to hold them, to stop them from fading. It never worked. But the failures taught him more than any success could, because he began to feel where the spirit went, how it resisted, what it feared, and in that fear, he found a path. He wrote nothing down. He spoke to no one, but his body began to change. His eyes remained open even in sleep. His blood cooled to the point of stillness. He had learned how to delay death, not through healing, but by disobedience. Death was not a law, it was a suggestion, and Andeddu no longer accepted it. The cult above did not know where their master had gone, but they felt him, in the walls, in their minds, in the way fire no longer obeyed them, in the dreams that came without warning. Some tried to follow him into the dark, none returned. Andeddu was no longer searching, he was becoming. He used the Rakatan chamber to craft the first version of the ritual, an imperfect transference of the soul, anchoring it to his own bones. It burned through his skin, it cracked his spine, but he endured, because now his spirit would not leave. Even if his body failed, even if his flesh decayed, he would remain. He did not fear death anymore. He pitied it, because he had gone beyond the veil and returned, not through resurrection, but through refusal. His voice had become part of the stone, and the stone would never forget him. The ritual had changed him. The body that once obeyed now resisted its master. Each breath came slower, each heartbeat quieter. His skin no longer healed as it once had, yet it did not rot. It remained suspended between life and death, refusing both. The air around him turned cold, heavy, alive with echoes of voices that weren't his own. Andeddu called them fragments, the remnants of those who had died within the chamber. When he reached too far into the currents of the Force, he heard them whisper, begging to be released. They were not ghosts. They were pieces, shattered reflections of the souls he had failed to preserve. He began to study their pain. For the first time, he understood what immortality demanded. It was not about defying death. It was about consuming it. Every failure, every spirit torn apart, added to his strength. He fed on their terror, drawing it into himself, molding it into something solid, something eternal. The Force did not grant this power willingly. It had to be stolen. He was the first to do it deliberately. He wrote nothing. He trusted no apprentice. The Sith, who would one day worship him as a god, had no idea what their god had become. He no longer resembled a man. His eyes glowed faintly red, rimmed with black veins, his teeth sharpened. His voice carried a hollow echo, as though another spoke with him. The line between flesh and spirit had blurred. But there were limits. The Rakatan device was failing. The technology, ancient and half-living, had begun to decay. The runes flickered. The chambers screamed when he touched them. The knowledge would die with it unless he could preserve it somewhere else. So he turned his mind inward. He began carving his thoughts into the Force itself. Not in writing, but in will. He built a container, a vessel of pure memory, forged from thought and pain. What the galaxy would one day call a holocron. The first of its kind. The process nearly killed him. The energy required to bind his knowledge into the crystal core burned away part of his own mind. Days vanished. Weeks, he forgot faces, names, and entire years of rule. But the holocron endured, and when he opened it again, it spoke with his voice. He had done it. His knowledge would not die. His essence, bound to the object, could now be awakened at will. A reflection of his consciousness, eternal and aware. He realized then that immortality was not one path. It was many. To preserve the body was to fight decay. To preserve the soul was to fight time. But to preserve the mind was to achieve both. The experiments grew darker. He began reanimating the bodies of his followers. The first few stumbled mindlessly, their souls shattered beyond repair. But one, a young acolyte whose name he never spoke, succeeded. The boy's heart had stopped, yet his mind still flickered faintly within the Force. Andeddu poured a fragment of his own energy into the corpse. The boy rose, silent, obedient, his eyes empty. Andeddu felt no guilt. Each success brought him closer to perfection. Each horror confirmed his purpose. His disciples whispered that he had learned to divide his essence, that even if his body were destroyed, he could anchor himself to another. They called it resurrection. He called it continuity. It was no longer about fear. It was about control. He believed the Force itself was flawed, a current meant to keep beings mortal, to remind them of limits. He would rewrite that law. He would show the galaxy that death was a choice, not a destiny. But the Force was watching. And in the darkness of Prakith's mountain, something began to stir in answer. The ritual did not come from study. It came from surrender. Andeddu had spent years mastering the secrets of the flesh, bending it, twisting it, forcing it to obey. But the body was still a prison. Every heartbeat was a chain. Every breath, a reminder that he was still bound to the limits of life. He began to see the truth. Immortality could never be achieved by preserving what was weak. It could only be achieved by discarding it. He tested his theory on himself. He sat within the Rakatan vault, surrounded by symbols etched in his own blood. The air was thick with the weight of centuries. Around him, the bones of the failed surrounded the ritual circle. Their faces were frozen in agony, a warning to anyone who dared to follow. He ignored them. He had already died 1,000 times in his mind. One more death would mean nothing. He began the chant. The words were not Sith. They were older, harsh, inhuman. The sound bent the air, causing the walls to tremble. The Force responded violently, as if rejecting the act. The light in the chamber dimmed, replaced by a deep, red pulse, the same heartbeat that had guided him since the beginning. He severed the first tie, the bond between body and breath. His lungs stopped moving. Then the second, the bond between flesh and will. His body slumped, yet his mind remained aware. He felt himself drifting, like smoke unraveling from fire. For a moment, there was nothing. Then he saw it, the void beyond life. A place the Jedi called peace and the Sith called hunger. It was endless, silent, empty. Yet within that emptiness, he felt something staring back. Something vast. The Force itself. He reached toward it, not to join it, but to defy it. He anchored his essence to the ritual circle, forcing his spirit to remain. The Force recoiled, tearing at him, trying to pull him apart. His body began to decay before his eyes. Flesh peeled, bone cracked. Still, he refused to leave. He screamed, but no sound came. Only the echo of his will. The ritual lasted days or perhaps moments. Time had no meaning there. When it ended, his body was gone, but his mind was not. He hovered between realms, seeing both at once. The material and the spiritual, the living and the dead. He had done it. He had achieved essence transference. But the cost was severe. He could not return to his flesh. The body that once held him was now only a husk. He had to create a new one, a vessel strong enough to contain his will. He forged it from his own preserved remains, reinforced by the dark alchemy he had perfected. When the vessel was complete, he poured himself into it. The transfer nearly destroyed him again. But when the darkness cleared, he awoke. Alive, whole, eternal. The first true immortal Sith. Yet even as he stood, something inside him trembled. The Force around him felt colder, now thinner. His presence was wrong. The balance that had once embraced him now avoided him. He had become a wound in the Force, a scar that could never heal. He didn't care. He had beaten death. The cult celebrated his return, declaring him divine. But Andeddu was not celebrating. He felt nothing. No joy. No satisfaction. Only emptiness. The soul that had fought to remain now felt hollow. And deep within that silence, he began to understand the final truth. Immortality was not victory, it was exile. He had escaped death, but in doing so, he had lost everything that made life worth saving. They began to notice, not the cult, not the loyal, but the Watchers, the ones beyond Prakith. The Jedi had long dismissed the deep core. Too unstable, too wild, too far from order. But there were ripples, disturbances in the Force, like screams with no mouth, pain with no wound. Something had awakened, and the Order could feel it. They didn't know his name, not yet, but they knew someone had crossed the veil, someone who should not exist. They sent shadows to investigate. Whispers, spies, archivists. Few returned. The ones who did came back broken. They spoke of a mountain that breathed, of stone that bled, of a king who had not aged in centuries. The council argued. Some believed it was a trick. Some feared it was truth. But one thing became clear. If his knowledge spread, the galaxy would never be the same. Immortality, taught, replicated, weaponized. They couldn't allow it. Andeddu knew they were watching. He felt them before they arrived. Jedi minds were easy to read, soaked in fear, afraid of what he had become. He sent them a message, not with words, with death. The next ship to land on Prakith was found weeks later, its crew frozen in place, still seated, still awake, eyes burned out from within. No wound, no trace, only silence. The Jedi grew desperate. They turned to the Senate, to ancient records, to the old Sith archives. That's when they found it. A name, not Andeddu, but a title. One used in the Rakatan age, one buried in tombs of blood and fire. The Undying One. They realized too late. He wasn't just studying immortality. He was mastering it, refining it, becoming it. They couldn't stop him. Not with diplomacy, not with war. But Prakith could, because even his own followers had begun to fear him. The cult had changed. No longer worship, only obedience. Empty-eyed rituals, children raised without names, rooms without light. The people could feel it. He was no longer a man, not even a god, just presence, cold, unfeeling. He had become a shadow that refused to lift. So they turned, not with fire, not with weapons, but with betrayal. His guards sealed the lower tunnels, collapsed the vaults, cut off his escape. The cult lied to his face, chanted his glory, as they led him to the trap. And when he descended, to complete his final work, they buried him, alive, deep beneath the mountain, deeper than stone, deeper than memory. Andeddu didn't scream. He didn't fight. He waited, because he had already left his body behind, because his soul was no longer tied to breath, because the grave meant nothing to him. They sealed the vault. They erased his name. They cleansed the temples and burned the scrolls. But the Holocron survived. It always survived. Waiting, sleeping, listening, because those who buried him believed he was gone. But Andeddu had learned the truth. You cannot kill what already lives. In death, they didn't call themselves a cult. Not at first. They called themselves witnesses, keepers, children of the Undying. They believed Andeddu had done what no being ever could. Not escape death, but refuse it. They built their homes near the mountain, then inside it, then beneath it. They brought offerings. Ash, blood, silence. Some gave up their names. Some gave up their faces. Some gave up more. Andeddu said nothing, but he watched. Always watched. He didn't need loyalty. He didn't need love. He needed obedience. So they gave it freely. Every whisper became a rule. Every movement, a ritual. They began to remove their eyes. A sign of trust. To prove that seeing was no longer necessary. That their vision came from him. They called themselves the Malevolence. Not a title, a condition. They were not priests, not servants. They were extensions of his will. When he meditated, they stood in place for days. When he slept, they breathed in rhythm. When he entered the shadows, they followed. He built chambers only they could access, halls made of bone, rooms with no sound, vaults where screams were stored in crystal. No light touched those corridors, but the malevolence did not need light. They moved through darkness like water, unquestioning, unthinking, but not empty, filled with purpose, filled with fear, because they believed something few others did. That Andeddu was not only a master of death, he was death, a living spectre, a voice that could erase thought, a presence that could rip the soul from flesh and wear it. So they prayed, not for protection, but to be noticed, because to be ignored by the Undying One was worse than punishment. It meant you didn't matter. Andeddu rarely spoke to them. He did not give commands. He gave signs, a flicker in the flame, a shadow that lingered, a word that appeared in blood, on the wall of a sleeping acolyte. They obeyed it all, without hesitation. They created languages based on silence, gestures, breathing patterns, movements that only the faithful could understand. Their children were born beneath the stone, raised to believe the galaxy was a lie, that the only truth was stillness, that all roads led back to the tomb that breathed. They never questioned. Until they did, it began small. A scholar asking why the king no longer appeared, a priest wondering why the bodies used in ritual never decayed. Then more began to feel it. Something was changing, not in the cult. In Andeddu himself, he had become more distant, more silent, less human. He no longer acknowledged them, no longer looked at them, no longer needed them. They feared they had been forgotten, but they were wrong. He remembered everything. Andeddu watched as their doubt grew. He could feel it in the force, like a slow sickness. And he smiled, because even betrayal was predictable. Even loyalty had its expiration. The malevolence had always believed. They were chosen, but Andeddu knew the truth. They were useful, until they weren't, and those who believed they could serve death forever had never met a being. Who was it? The fire beneath the mountain never stopped burning. It didn't need air. It didn't need fuel. It simply existed. The cult said it was his gift. That Andeddu had pulled flame from the force itself, a reflection of his soul, a light that could never die. But that light did not comfort them. It watched them. It whispered to them. And sometimes it spoke their names. Every night, the malevolence gathered before it, 1,000 shadows kneeling in unison, heads bowed, eyes sealed with wax. They offered their blood to the fire, drops at first, then more, until the floor beneath the altar turned black. Andeddu appeared only once each cycle. He no longer walked. He glided through the heat, his robes dragging sparks that never touched the ground. They saw no wounds, no age, no decay, only permanence. To them, he was perfection. To him, they were tools. He spoke softly, his voice echoing inside their skulls, not their ears. He told them the truth, that death was weak, that the force itself was flawed, that the universe was designed to forget. He would correct it, and they would help him. The rituals grew darker, longer, more violent. No one understood what the words meant anymore. Only that to stop repeating them meant death. Children were taken from their mothers, their eyes covered before they learned to speak. They were told they were lucky, chosen to serve the eternal. Andeddu demanded silence in all things. No laughter, no song, no voice raised above the breath. To make sound without his will was forbidden, because only he had earned the right to be heard. Those who disobeyed disappeared, their robes left folded by the altar, their names carved into the wall beside the flame. The malevolence accepted it. They always did, because to question was to sin, and to sin was to vanish. Yet even among the faithful, fear began to spread. The fire had changed color, blue at first, then white, then black. Its light no longer revealed, it consumed. Those who looked too long saw faces in the heat, their own faces, screaming, mouths open in silence. Andeddu called it enlightenment. He told them the flame was their future, a vision of eternity. But eternity looked like suffering, and they were beginning to understand that. Still, none dared leave, because leaving meant being hunted, and death outside the cult was still death. Inside, at least, there was purpose, even if that purpose was pain. One night, the High Acolyte entered the inner chamber. She begged to see his true form. She wanted proof of his divinity. Andeddu turned toward her. For the first time in decades, the flame dimmed. His face was not a face. It was shifting shadow and bone, drained of color, half spirit, half flesh. The acolyte screamed. The sound echoed through the mountain. The fire flared, and she was gone. No body, no ash, just absence. And the next morning, the flame burned brighter than ever. The malevolence took it as a sign, proof that faith had been rewarded. But somewhere, deep inside that burning light, a voice began to whisper louder. Not to the cult, to him. Andeddu listened. Because for the first time in eternity, the voice was not his own. The mountain began to speak, not with thunder, not with tremors, but with voices, faint at first, barely heard, like wind slipping through cracks. Then clearer, human, desperate, unending. The malevolence believed it was a test. They said the spirits of the unworthy were crying for forgiveness. But Andeddu knew the truth. They were not spirits. They were memories, pieces of himself, fragments torn loose from centuries of ritual and rage. They clung to the stone, echoing his own mind back at him. Every wall became a reflection, every corridor a thought he could not silence. At first, he tried to ignore them. He walked the tunnels, as he always had, slow, silent, watching. But the whispers followed. They repeated his own words, then twisted them. "You are eternal," they said. "Then why are you afraid?" He told himself it was weakness, residual energy, echoes of power. But deep down, he recognized their tone. They sounded like him. Before he became what he was. Before the experiments. Before the fire. Before the silence. They sounded human. Andeddu began sealing the tunnels. One by one, He ordered the malevolence to wall off the lower vaults. They obeyed, but not without fear. The whispers had grown louder. They called the names of the cult by birth. Names no one should have known. Names they had given up long ago. The priests begged him to stop. He didn't. He demanded more walls, more stone, more silence. But silence only made the voices clearer. When he meditated, he saw faces in the darkness. When he slept, he dreamed of blood dripping from the ceiling. Each drop carried a voice. Each voice spoke his failures aloud. He woke screaming, and the mountain screamed with him. The cult believed it divine. They built shrines around the cracks, where whispers were strongest. They pressed their heads to the walls, listening for salvation. But what they heard was madness. Andeddu began to isolate himself. He dismissed his attendants. He forbade entry to the deepest chambers. Only the fire remained, and the walls. They never stopped speaking. They reminded him of every death, every ritual, every lie. He told them he had transcended fear. They told him fear had transcended him. The more he denied it, the stronger they became. It was not the force. It was him. The soul he had split apart was finding its way back, piece by piece, fragment by fragment. Andeddu realized what immortality truly meant. Not freedom from death, but captivity within the self. He had not defeated the grave. He had dragged it inside him. The malevolence watched their master unravel. He no longer appeared radiant. His movements slowed. His voice, when heard, cracked like breaking stone. Still, they obeyed. They prayed to the sound of his torment. They sang to the echoes of his screams. And in time, they mistook his madness for revelation, because the line between godhood and insanity had long disappeared, and somewhere, buried in the stone that once obeyed him, the whispers changed. They no longer pleaded. They laughed, and for the first time in eternity, the Undying King remembered what it meant to be afraid. The throne no longer brought him peace. It had once been a symbol, control, legacy, victory over death. Now it was cold and hollow and silent in the wrong way. He had built it from the bones of his enemies. Sith who defied him, Jedi who tried to stop him, servants who knew too much. But the throne did not remember them. Only he did. Every time he sat, he felt the weight, not of power, of failure. It pressed against his spine, crawled across his shoulders, spoke into the back of his skull. The voice was always his, but older, cracked, tired. The cult believed he was meditating, reaching into deeper realms, ascending beyond flesh. But he was hiding from the Force, from the whispers, from himself. He had spent lifetimes seeking eternity. Now eternity would not let him rest. His body refused to die, but his mind was splintering. Too many rituals, too many fragments, too many souls burned through his own. He began speaking to things no one else could see. Shadows, mirrors, his own reflection in the black stone. He asked it questions, then feared the answers. He no longer trusted the malevolence. They had grown strange, detached. Some began creating their own rituals, Others claimed to receive visions from the fire, even when he gave none. Andeddu watched from behind the throne as his cult turned inward, their faith twisting into paranoia, their loyalty into obsession. They started whispering about succession. Who would take his place if the eternal king fell? He killed the first to speak it, then the second, then stopped counting, because even death no longer made them afraid. His silence had created monsters. His teachings now echoes. His flame, just heat without meaning. He sat alone, motionless, watching the fire flicker. He wondered what it would be like to let go, to vanish, to fade, to sleep. But his soul wouldn't let him. It clawed back every time. Refusing surrender, he had locked himself inside his own ritual, a prison made from victory. He remembered the first time he tasted immortality, the rush, the terror, the power, and now, nothing, no fear, no joy, just silence. The whispers had faded, but not because they were gone, because he had become one of them. He was now the voice, scratching at the edge of his mind, the king who feared his own throne, the master who outlived his meaning, the god who looked into eternity and saw himself staring back. And somewhere, deep beneath the bones and ash, he felt a new presence. Not light, not dark, something waiting, something patient, something watching him, the way he had watched others. Andeddu stood from the throne, not in defiance, not in purpose, but in fear, not of death, but of what came after. Because he now knew, immortality was not survival. It was loneliness, without end. And in that final moment, he looked toward the flame and wondered if anything had ever truly burned at all. The statues fell in silence. No horns, no war cries, just dust and breath, heavy, panicked, angry. For centuries, the people of Prakith had bowed, not out of love, not even fear, but because they believed there was no choice. Now, they had one. The mountain no longer whispered. The fire no longer answered. The god they had followed had stopped speaking. And so, they began to speak for themselves. It started with rumors that Andeddu had gone mad, that he no longer ruled, that he was hiding from something even he could not kill. The cult denied it, but the cult no longer frightened them. They were tired of rituals they didn't understand, of children taken in the night, of silence, of the stench of rot that hung around the palace walls. One night, a child did not return. A mother waited by the gate until sunrise, until the next. Then she screamed, louder than anyone had dared in generations. Others joined her, and then more, until the gates of Prak city echoed with voices, not of worship, but rage. The first statue fell by accident. A rope, a lever, a crowd. The sound cracked through the stone streets. It shook the foundations. It woke something that had long pretended to sleep. Andeddu opened his eyes, not in fear, in recognition. He had known this moment would come. All things break, even devotion, especially devotion. He watched from the upper spires. as flames bloomed across the outer courts. The people no longer wore hoods. They no longer knelt. They carried tools, not weapons. Mining picks, torches, their own hands. They weren't warriors, but they didn't need to be. They had numbers, and they had nothing left to lose. The cult tried to stop them, but the cult was hollow. For years, they had only followed. They had no command. When the voice fell silent, Andeddu stood in his great hall, alone. The throne felt distant, cold, not like before. The holocron sat in his hand, its glow dim, still beating, still alive. His legacy, compressed into a single object. He had not prepared for this, not fully. Because gods do not plan for rebellion. They assume eternity will hold. The doors of the palace cracked, stone meeting stone, old hinges screaming. Andeddu didn't run. He waited. The first torchlight spilled across the floor. Then shadows, then faces, some young, some old, all changed. He recognized none of them, but they all knew him. The air was thick, with something heavier than hatred. Disappointment. They had believed, and he had wasted it. He did not speak. He only turned, and vanished into the darkness. Beneath the throne, there were tunnels no one else had seen. Passages carved in secret. When he still trusted nothing, he moved like a whisper. No breath, no heartbeat, just motion. He left everything behind. The throne, the cult, the kingdom, the centuries, but not the holocron. He clutched it like a second heart, not for protection, but because it was the only part of him, still whole. Above, the palace was overrun, the fire extinguished, the shrines shattered, but the people didn't celebrate. They stood in silence, realizing what they had done. They had killed a god, or something worse, and somewhere in the empty wind, they thought they heard laughter, but there was no one left to claim it. The city burned, but it was not the fire that frightened them. It was how quiet it was. No armies clashed, no commanders shouted, no banners rose, only smoke, the smell of centuries ending. The great palace, once radiant, was now a mountain of ash. Its golden windows bled light, as if the building itself were dying. Inside, the malevolence was gone. Some fled, some stayed, some knelt before the flames, and waited to join their god. Andeddu had vanished into the lower vaults. Only his voice remained, a low hum beneath the roar of burning stone. The people swore they could still hear it. A whisper carried through the smoke, like the wind itself was praying. Life is the lie, it said. Only death is real. But they didn't believe him anymore. The rebellion was not righteous. It was desperate. Too many years of silence, too many empty graves. They had forgotten how to speak without permission. Now every word sounded like defiance. They tore down the spires. They smashed the statues. They destroyed the tombs that once held his priests. But every time one fell, the fire grew stronger, as if the mountain itself resisted their cleansing. Those who tried to flee found the exit sealed. The tunnels shifted. The air thickened. The city was turning into a coffin. They realized too late. They weren't destroying his kingdom. They were feeding it. Andeddu's rituals had bound him to the stone, to the flame, to them. Every death empowered the thing they feared. He had learned to live through others, to take their breath and call it his own. The Holocron pulsed beneath the ground, a heartbeat in the dark, waiting for his command. Andeddu could feel their hatred, their rage, their faith dying, and he drew it in. He did not want forgiveness. He wanted energy. He whispered one word, a word older than Sith, older than the Force. The mountain answered. Flames burst through the cracks. Screams echoed from the lower districts. The streets split open. Black fire poured out. The people tried to run, but there was nowhere left to run to. They had killed their god, but not the power that made him. It was never about worship. It was about connection. Every life tied to his name was his to claim. And as the city burned, he claimed them all. The storm above Prakith turned red. Lightning struck the towers, until nothing remained but ruin. The earth swallowed the rest. Whole families vanished, homes erased, history forgotten. Andeddu walked through it all, unharmed, unbothered, unchanged. His robes caught flame, but the fire bent around him. The air hissed against his skin, then fled from it. He watched the last tower collapse and felt no grief, only release. For the first time in centuries, he was free. No worshippers, no eyes, no voices, just silence. He turned his back on the city. Behind him, the fire dimmed. The mountain cooled. The people were gone. The cult forgotten. The kingdom erased. All that remained was the Holocron's faint hum. It guided him through the smoke, calling him toward the stars, toward exile, toward Korriban, toward the others who would one day learn his name. Andeddu did not look back, because everything behind him was already dead. The air on Prakith turned black. Ash blotted out the sun. The mountain bled smoke. The city screamed itself to death. Andeddu walked through the ruin, like a ghost who had forgotten how to haunt. Each step echoed with memory. Every street carried the sound of prayers, spoken in his name. Prayers he never answered. He had spent lifetimes building this world, teaching them silence, teaching them obedience, teaching them to forget what life was. Now they remembered, and they burned for it. He passed the temple gates. They were gone. Only embers and bone remained. The symbols carved into the stone had melted into shapeless marks. His throne room had collapsed. The pillars bent inward, as if the palace had folded itself into mourning. He looked upon it and felt nothing. No anger, no sorrow, no pride. He had wanted to be eternal, and he was. But eternity was hollow, a reflection with no face. He heard their voices still, not alive, not dead. The remnants of those he consumed. Their whispers crawled along the air, like insects in the dark. They begged him to stop, to let them rest. To die, he couldn't, because he didn't know how. He reached the courtyard, where once he stood as king. Now there was nothing but dust, and in the center, the flame still burned. It flickered weakly, fighting to survive. The last light of his dominion. Andeddu stood before it. The fire reflected in his eyes. He could see what he had become. A corpse that refused to fall. A soul trapped in its own echo. He reached into the flame. It did not burn him. It bowed to him. The heat turned cold. The light turned black. He absorbed it. The last breath of his kingdom. The last memory of the god they made. And for one heartbeat, he felt it. The weight of what he had done. The mothers, the children, the faithful who died believing. It almost broke him. Almost. Then the feeling faded, and he was empty again. He turned away from the ruins. The Holocron pulsed against his palm. It whispered to him. It called him by name. Not king, not lord, just Andeddu. He remembered the boy he once was. The cave, the mountain, the first whisper that promised eternity. It had been a lie. He had known that. He followed it anyway, because he feared what all beings fear, to be forgotten. And now, as he looked upon the ashes of his world, he realized something worse. He would never be forgotten. And that was the curse. He felt the planet shifting, the tunnels collapsing, the air itself rejecting him. Prakith wanted to bury its sin, to erase the one who refused to die. Andeddu understood. He whispered a single word. Farewell. The mountain answered with thunder. The last stones fell. The last flames died. He stepped into the shadows, the holocron glowing faintly in his hand. He did not run. He drifted through corridors he had carved, through centuries of lies, through the death of belief. And when he reached the open sky, he saw no stars, only darkness and freedom. The god was dead, but the man endured. And somewhere beyond the deep core, a world waited, a place where the Sith still dreamed. Korriban, the grave of kings, the birthplace of monsters. And soon, their silence would belong to him. He left the deep core, without looking back. No ship, no map, just will. The force bent around him. Not in trust, in warning. He did not care. He passed through systems, unnamed on charts. Worlds too broken to remember. They were once alive. He felt drawn forward, pulled by something old, older than even he had become. Korriban, a name whispered through the dark, like a memory he hadn't earned. He had heard it once, buried in Rakatan stone, the home of the Sith, the valley of red dust, a world built from ash. He thought it myth, until he felt it calling. The holocron pulsed louder. The closer he came, it knew, and it approved. The journey was slow. Time no longer mattered. He did not sleep. He did not eat. He simply moved across broken space, through currents of raw gravity, across black storms and burning skies. Every system he passed recoiled. Creatures cried without knowing why. Planets darkened, because he was not just traveling, he was arriving. When he reached orbit, he felt it. Pain, layered in the soil. A history carved with blades. The smell of betrayal, still fresh in the wind. Korriban did not welcome him. It warned him. The tombs watched. The spirits stirred. The stone remembered, but so did he. Andeddu descended without fear. He touched ground, in silence. No drums, no ritual, just dust. It clung to his robes. It tasted like blood. The Valley of the Dark Lords. He had read of their power. He had seen their names, scratched into the walls of broken temples. Now they stood before him, in death, empty graves, cracked stone, statues without faces. He walked among them, as one of their own, but they did not see him yet. Not truly. To them, he was a stranger, a shadow from a dying world. He would change that. He found a hollow cave, old, unmarked, unclaimed. It suited him. Here, he carved a throne, not from bone, not from gold, from dust. And in the stillness, he began again. He opened the Holocron. Its light filled the chamber, like the last sun of a forgotten system. He spoke his name into the walls, slow, deliberate, patient. The Force listened. Korriban listened. The tombs did not speak, but they noticed, and that was enough. He had no followers, no cult, no fire, only a name and a truth. He would not beg for legacy. He would become it. One whisper at a time, one secret at a time, one soul at a time. The galaxy would remember, not because he demanded it, but because forgetting him would be impossible. He no longer feared death. He no longer feared silence, because both belonged to him now. And in time, even Korriban would kneel. He arrived without ceremony. No title, no banner, no bloodline, just a name carved into silence. Andeddu. Korriban had seen kings before. It had buried tyrants, enthroned monsters, worshipped shadows. But this one felt different. He did not challenge. He did not kneel. He simply entered, as if the planet itself had been waiting for him. The Sith Lords took notice. They were not used to being ignored. He claimed no allegiance. He asked for no alliance. He offered no flattery. He only spoke when he was ready to be heard. At first, they mocked him. They called him a drifter, a relic from a dead system, a liar hiding behind myth. But when he opened the Holocron, the silence returned. Its glow spilled into the chamber, like memory made solid. Its voice, his voice, spoke truths they did not know, but feared were real. It told them of rituals, lost to fire, of Force wounds that never healed, of immortality, not as a dream, but as a curse. You could survive. He taught without teaching. He answered without words. He looked into their eyes and showed them their own fears. They began to listen, but they did not trust him, because the Sith do not trust strangers. And Andeddu was stranger than most. He wore no armor, no symbols, no crimson blade, only a stare and silence. They began to watch him. When they thought he couldn't see, they followed his steps, through tombs that should not have opened. They whispered of the way shadows moved. When he passed, they wondered if he was Sith at all, or something worse. One Lord challenged him, publicly, demanded proof. Andeddu said nothing. He raised a hand, and the challenger's heart stopped. Not crushed, not torn, just stopped. Mid-sentence, mid-breath, mid-thought. No scream, no sound, just stillness. The others said nothing, because now they understood. He did not ask for their respect. He had never needed it. He had not come to rule. He had come to disappear, into stone, into legend, into a place where even the Sith feared to look. The Valley of the Dark Lords had gained a new voice, but it did not shout. It whispered from the corners of the tombs, from the cracks in the walls, from the eyes of statues that no longer blinked. Andeddu walked the old paths alone. He spoke to no one, yet the force bent around him, like smoke caught in breath. He was not like them. They sought glory. He sought escape. They wanted power. He wanted permanence, and that difference terrified them. He slept beneath the earth, surrounded by silence. But every day, the Sith grew more uneasy, because, while they debated titles, he was becoming something they didn't understand. A shadow that made other shadows tremble. A stranger who never needed to be welcomed to take his place. Among the dead, they thought they had seen everything. The lords of Korriban, keepers of the old ways, heirs to pain, masters of death, but they had never seen him. Not truly. Andeddu did not speak of conquest. He spoke of things older than conquest. He named rituals they had forgotten. He described force wounds that never healed. He recited prayers in a language the tombs remembered, but the lords did not. They called it heresy until he proved it. One by one, he began to show them what had been lost. He could raise the dead, not reanimated slaves, but sentience, identity, souls brought back through agony. They asked how. He never answered. Instead, he watched as they drew closer, hungry, desperate, because even Sith fear the end. And he offered what none of them had: continuity, not for power, but for self, to remain, even when flesh turned to dust. They envied him. Andeddu knew it. He fed them pieces, fragments of truth, wrapped in riddles, enough to make them crave more, but never enough to be free of him. He was a well they could never empty, and they hated him for it, because they sensed the danger. His power was not loud, not violent, not explosive. It was quiet, patient, like a parasite with perfect memory. The Sith began to whisper. Some called him a fraud, others a prophet. Some believed he was not alive at all, but an echo, a ghost shaped by will alone. The truth frightened them, because the truth was, he had outgrown the Sith. He was not their student, not their brother. He was something they could not name. His knowledge came not from holocrons, but from silence, from isolation, from pain so old it had forgotten how to scream. Andeddu kept to the shadows, but every now and then he left clues, a symbol carved into a sealed tomb that no one else could enter, a phrase etched into a wall. that answered a question no one had asked aloud. A flicker in the Force that passed through their thoughts, like a memory not their own. He never claimed credit, but they knew, because only one thing frightened a Sith. Not death, not war, not loss. The unknown. Andeddu was unknown. He walked the halls as if they belonged to him. He sat in places reserved for the first. He stared at ancient carvings and shook his head, because he remembered what they had forgotten. Not just the rituals, not just the names, the meaning. The Sith believed they were rulers, but Andeddu knew they were inheritors, caretakers of something they did not create. And that realization began to break them. Some tried to follow him, to study his path. They disappeared. Some tried to kill him. They disappeared too. No one spoke of it, but everyone knew. Korriban itself had shifted. The wind no longer howled through empty graves. It whispered, not in fear, in reverence, because something older had returned, and the world had recognized its maker. The tombs began to close, not by command, by instinct, stone shifting against stone, entrances sealing themselves, whispers fading into cracks. Korriban was breathing again. It had chosen its master, and it was not them. The Sith Lords gathered in secret, deep halls, dim torches, eyes wide with envy. They spoke of Andeddu, the way men speak of plagues, carefully, quietly, never for too long. He had not killed anyone openly. He had not raised an army. He had not even taken a throne. But somehow, they were already beneath him. His knowledge was a weapon, his silence a blade. The older lords warned the younger. Do not look into his eyes, they said. Do not listen when he speaks, because something inside his words lingered, something that stayed even after he was gone. Andeddu watched them crumble. Their fear was proof of his success. He had wanted devotion once. Now he preferred obedience. But even obedience turned brittle. Korriban did not reward unity. It thrived on suspicion. It thrived on betrayal. The Sith were born from it, and he had become its perfection. They began to plot, not out of courage, out of terror. They whispered of rituals, to strip him of his essence, to burn his name from the archives, to erase his existence, so he could no longer return. They believed death was still an answer. They did not understand that he had already escaped it. Andeddu saw it coming. He saw every thought, before it was spoken, every intention, before it was acted on. He smiled, because he had learned that even the dark side could be predictable. They gathered their strength. He gathered his patience. They came to his dwelling in the valley, dozens of them, blades drawn, masks gleaming in the dusk. They expected fear. They found nothing. The halls were empty. The air still. No guards, no defenses, just a voice that came from everywhere at once. Stone does not trust blood. Then the doors sealed. The Sith struck at the walls. Their sabers met no resistance, because the stone was alive. It swallowed sound. It swallowed light. And one by one, It swallowed them. No screams escaped. No force signatures remained. When the doors opened again, Andeddu stood alone. He had not moved. He had not bled. But the dust beneath his feet was heavier. The tombs had accepted their offering. He looked up at the sky. Red clouds, black wind, silence. He was no longer hunted. But he was no longer among them, either. The lords that survived spoke his name only in private. They called him the Deathless, not in reverence. In warning, they feared that to speak of him was to summon him. And perhaps they were right. Because from that day forward, Korriban changed. The air thickened, the shadows lengthened, and the stone began to whisper, in a voice that was not its own, the voice of the one it had chosen, the one who no longer trusted blood. He chose to disappear, not out of fear, but because he no longer needed to be seen. His name was already carved into the breath of Korriban. His presence had outlived the need for presence. Andeddu descended, not into exile, into preservation. Beneath the valley of the Dark Lords lay a hollow space. No map had recorded, a chamber untouched by time. He sealed it with will alone. The stone responded. It recognized its master. Inside, he built nothing. No throne, no altar, no monument, only silence and symbols drawn in his own blood. The ritual would take time, years, maybe longer. But time was no longer his enemy. He carved markings into the walls, not to be read, to be felt, memories encoded in the Force. Thoughts without language, pain without sound. He began to unmake himself. First the body, then the voice, then the need to exist. In any one form, he stretched his essence. Like thread across the tomb, he bound it to the dust, to the air, to the stone. He folded his consciousness into the heart of the chamber, layer by layer, until his soul became architecture. The Force resisted. It always did. But Andeddu had learned how to wait. He endured the tearing, the burning, the forgetting. He let his past die, let his pain rot, let his name fall silent. And when the ritual ended, he did not speak, because the tomb was now breathing for him. It inhaled sorrow, exhaled dread. It pulsed with life he no longer needed. The Sith above called him gone, buried, consumed by his own madness. They avoided the tomb. They called it cursed, a wound in the valley, a place where voices called out that did not belong to the dead. But some heard more. Apprentices, acolytes, curious minds who felt drawn to the silence. They entered. Most did not return. The ones who did spoke of dreams, filled with burning skies, collapsing stars, and a voice that did not echo, because it was already inside them. Andeddu had become legend, then myth, then fear, but beneath it all, he waited, not for revenge, not for worship, for continuity, for the day someone would open the tomb, not to destroy him, but to learn, to ask the one question that would bring him back. How do I live? Forever? The Holocron rested near the altar. dormant, but not asleep. It hummed with memory. His memory, a seed, waiting for soil. Centuries passed, then millennia. Korriban fell, rose, fell again. New Sith claimed power, built empires, burned them down, but the tomb remained, breathing, unmoving, and inside, the soul of Darth Andeddu smiled, because he had not died. He had simply chosen to stop pretending he was ever alive. It sat in darkness, unmoving, untouched, unopened, not because it was hidden, but because the Force was afraid of it. Not everyone could feel it. Not everyone should, but for those who could, it was like standing beside something that remembered your name. Before you were born, the Holocron had no guards, no lock, no voice calling out, but it waited, not with patience, with certainty, because it had been built for one purpose: to be found, and not by the weak, not by the curious, only by someone willing to bleed for truth. Centuries passed, empires rose, the Jedi expanded, the Sith fractured, worlds forgot their names, but the cube remained. It passed through hands, like a curse, each owner less certain they ever owned it. It whispered in sleep, it pulsed when ignored. It remained quiet until it wasn't. Some tried to destroy it. Fire, lightning, the deepest void of space. It always returned, because it wasn't just metal. It wasn't just data. It was him, Darth Andeddu, the Undying One, the voice of the forgotten tomb. His soul didn't rest inside it. It fed from it, echoed through it, watched, waiting for the one who wouldn't flinch at madness. It was eventually placed within a vault on Lehan, buried in the ruins of another fallen empire. The Rakata, the ones Andeddu had studied before he surpassed them. The Jedi refused to touch it. The Sith forgot it was there, and the galaxy kept moving. But it waited, because time does not frighten truth. And then one day, someone came, not by accident, by design, a Sith who did not belong to the old ways, who had torn down the Brotherhood so he could build something stronger. Darth Bane. He found the vault, through pain, through memory, through will. He walked among dust, older than language, and did not turn back. He touched the cube. It did not resist. And for the first time, in 1,000 years, it opened. The air shifted, the temperature dropped, the Force pulled back, like breath before a scream. And then it spoke, not in basic, not in Sith, in thought, in memory, in dread. The voice of Darth Andeddu poured into Bane's mind, like venom wrapped in silk. No greeting, no name, only knowledge, but not offered, tested, because the Holocron was not a teacher, it was a trial, and Bane had just entered it. The first lesson was pain, not physical, not even mental, existential. The knowledge that immortality was not a gift. It was a wound, a scar that never closed. Andeddu showed him what it meant to hold on after life had ended, not once, but again and again and again, through vessels that cracked, through minds that forgot, through bodies that rejected his will. It was not beautiful, it was not powerful, it was survival at any cost. Bane staggered, not in body, in faith, because the thing he sought was no longer a myth. It had a voice, a face, a purpose, and that purpose was not to help him. It was to see if he deserved to carry it forward. The cube closed, but Bane did not walk away. He sat beside it, in silence, because now he understood something no Sith had understood before. The price of eternity is everything. You don't realize you'll miss until it's gone. The Holocron spoke again. Not aloud, not in sequence, not in mercy. It spoke like memory, out of order, fragmented, alive. Each word crawled, each truth burned. Andeddu's voice did not echo. It lingered, it infected. Bane was strong, but strength did not matter here. The Holocron did not respond to power. It responded to hunger. And Bane's hunger was endless. He had destroyed the Brotherhood. He had carved the rule of two, from fire and betrayal. He had redefined the Sith, and now he sought to redefine death. But the voice had other plans. It whispered without pause, without rhythm, without kindness. Life is decay, it said. Death is truth. Only will survives the void. Bane tried to speak, to question, to command. The voice laughed. It sounded like stone cracking, like air collapsing. Do you think you are the first? It asked. The Force does not remember names. It remembers screams. Visions flooded his mind. Bodies shifting, eyes burning, hands tearing through time, to hold on to what no one should. He saw Andeddu's own experiments, the rituals, the vessels, the endless process of dying without dying. He felt the agony, the loss, the madness. It wasn't teaching, it was showing. Because knowledge, this dark, couldn't be spoken. It had to be endured. The Holocron flared. Images burned across the room. Symbols older than Sith, older than the Force. Each one a map of pain. Each one a scar in reality. Bane's body trembled, but his will held. He had not come for comfort. He had come for understanding. He reached deeper, into the pulse of the cube, into the storm of thought. The voice shifted. It softened, almost human. You want to live forever. A pause. You already do. Bane froze. He didn't understand. Not yet. Every Sith, the voice continued, is the same will, reborn again and again. You call it ambition. I call it disease. He saw flashes, lords and acolytes, empires rising, falling, bleeding, different faces, same hunger. It wasn't reincarnation. It was infection, passed through blood, through creed, through hate. Bane realized what the Holocron was. Not an archive, not a tool, a prison. Andeddu hadn't stored his soul. He had trapped it, caged it, bound it to the one thing that could never decay: knowledge. It was eternity, but without freedom. The voice grew quiet, then closer, inside his mind now, behind the eyes. You think you will use me? Silence. I will use you. Bane tried to resist. He summoned the dark side. Lightning flickered around him. The chamber shuddered, but the Holocron did not break. It absorbed the energy, fed on it, reflected it back. The lightning vanished. The air grew still. Then came a whisper, so soft, he almost didn't hear it. You will remember my name when yours is gone. Bane fell to one knee, not from defeat, from clarity. He saw the truth. Andeddu hadn't just survived. He had become the test itself. Every Sith who opened the cube was not learning. They were continuing him. The voice faded, but it did not leave. It stayed inside him, waiting, coiled. Bane rose, silent, changed. He closed the Holocron. Its light dimmed, but in the dark, he could still hear it. The whisper, the reminder, I am not gone. And in that quiet, Bane realized neither was he. Because immortality was not about surviving death. It was about refusing to end. Days passed, then weeks, then time stopped meaning anything. The Holocron remained where it was, unmoving, unchanged, alive. Bane studied it endlessly. He didn't sleep. He barely ate. He spoke less and less. Because every time he closed his eyes, he saw Andeddu, not the man, the memory, the infection. It spoke without voice. It taught without words. It grew inside his mind, like a second thought that refused to die. He had wanted immortality. Now it wanted him. The Holocron was no longer an object. It was a wound, and it bled knowledge. Every night, Bane returned to it, not to learn, to survive it. He tried to command it. He used all the strength of his will, all the discipline of the rule of two. But Andeddu had written himself into the structure of the Force. There was no defeating him, only enduring him. Bane felt his own mind fracture, memories overlapping, thoughts repeating. He heard voices that didn't belong to him. Old Sith, forgotten masters, the ghosts of those who had opened the cube before. Their whispers mixed with Andeddu's, a choir of failure, a temple of pain. Bane stood in the center of it all, unmoving, listening. He began to understand something no Jedi ever could. Knowledge was not light. It was gravity. The deeper you fell, the harder it was to return. Andeddu had drowned in it. And now Bane was learning how to breathe underwater. He began to mimic the voice, repeating the words he heard, not in worship, in study, because power was pattern. And Bane knew if he could understand the rhythm, he could break it. He recorded his findings in secret, carved them into his own Holocron, altered, refined, controlled. He would take Andeddu's madness and reshape it into purpose. But that was the danger, because madness doesn't fade. It adapts. The more Bane learned, the less he recognized his own thoughts. He found himself speaking to the Holocron, not as a relic, as a companion. He argued with it. He begged it. He threatened it. And sometimes he listened to it. The line between them was thinning. The dark side does not care for boundaries. It only consumes. Andeddu's presence fed on his obsession. The cube pulsed stronger each day. The room grew colder, the shadows longer. His apprentice, Zana, noticed the change. She asked what he was hiding. He said nothing, because the truth was unteachable. She could not know that the path to immortality was not through power, but through surrender. Andeddu whispered it again. Always the same, always cruel. Life is the lie, death is the truth, but truth can be rewritten. Bane began to believe him. Not entirely, just enough. He saw visions of what could be. Bodies renewed, minds preserved, a line of Sith stretching forever, not through blood, through will, but every vision ended the same way. The face in the reflection wasn't his, it was Andeddu's. He smashed the Holocron. Once, twice, again. It didn't break. It laughed. He screamed until his throat tore. Then he stopped, because the voice in his mind wasn't mocking him anymore. It was calm, almost proud. You understand now, it said. The body is nothing. The mind is the vessel, and the vessel is ready. Bane stared at the cube, silent, breathing slowly. He wasn't afraid anymore. He was remembering, because somewhere deep inside, he knew this conversation had already happened before, and that maybe it wasn't him learning from Andeddu. It was Andeddu learning how to live again. The nights grew longer, but Bane no longer noticed time. He could feel Andeddu everywhere, in the walls, in the silence, in his own breath. He didn't dream anymore. He remembered. Each dream was a lesson, each memory a wound, each whisper a command. The Holocron didn't glow now. It pulsed, like a living heart. It followed his rhythm, or maybe he followed its. He couldn't tell anymore. Zana watched him fade. She said nothing, not out of loyalty, out of fear, because when he spoke, his voice wasn't always his. Sometimes it came from somewhere deeper, older. He had begun to call it communion, but it wasn't. It was invasion. Andeddu was not content to be remembered. He wanted to return, through will, through faith, through flesh. And Bane was giving him a doorway. He started testing the ritual, fragments of the transference technique, hidden inside the Holocron's code. Each attempt cost him something, a thought, a memory, a piece of himself, and every loss made Andeddu stronger. He could hear him now, without touching the cube, in the air, in the force, in the spaces between his own thoughts. Immortality is not gained, the voice said. It is accepted. Bane resisted. He was not a vessel. He was the rule of two. The beginning of order within chaos. But the voice was patient. It didn't argue. It simply waited. Every time he doubted, it whispered reason. Every time he weakened, it whispered faith. It knew him too well, because it had known every Sith before him. And when the moment came, he didn't recognize it. He felt his heart slow, his mind expand, his spirit loosen. The boundary between thought and presence faded. Andeddu moved closer, his tone calm, his presence vast. "You cannot control eternity," he said. "You can only join it." The room darkened. The holocron rose. Light spilled across the walls. Like veins of bloodless fire, Bane reached for it. The voice met him halfway. And for 1 second, they were the same. Power surged. The force twisted. Reality bent inward. Zana felt it from beyond the chamber. She heard the scream, but it wasn't human. It was two souls, fighting over one body. The ground split. Energy burst outward. Then silence. Only smoke remained. Zana entered slowly. The holocron lay on the floor, cracked, dim. Bane was gone, but his armor still smoked. She called his name. No answer, only a whisper, low, gentle, almost grateful. "Life is the lie." She picked up the holocron. It flickered once, a faint blue light. Then it spoke. Not Andeddu, not Bane. Something between. Something new. Zana froze. Because the voice knew her name. "Apprentice," it said. "Do you wish to learn?" Her hands trembled. The cube grew heavier. The air grew colder. She wanted to drop it, but she didn't. Because deep down, she understood. The Sith never die. They simply change form. Each era inherits the hunger of the last. Each master carries the shadow of the one before. The holocron was proof, and somewhere within it, Darth Andeddu laughed. Not in triumph, in satisfaction. Because even after 1,000 years, his design still held. His voice still echoed. His curse still worked. The cube dimmed. The tombs of Korriban slept again. But now there were two voices. Inside the darkness. One ancient, one reborn. And neither would ever fade. There was no map, no trail, no voice calling him forward. Only a feeling. Darth Bane stood beneath the blood-red skies of Korriban, alone, listening. The Force pulsed, but not like it usually did. It didn't flow. It twisted. It recoiled. Andeddu was here. Not in name, not in legend. In presence. The holocron hadn't spoken again, but it didn't need to. It had already shown him the truth. Now it was showing him the door. He walked without speaking. Down into the canyons, past the graves of the old kings, beneath the valley that had forgotten more Sith than the galaxy had ever known. The air thinned. The stone darkened. He moved past broken temples, past carved warnings in tongues long extinct. He ignored them, because the real warning was the silence. The place he found had no marker, no guards, no light, just a narrow passage carved from the bones of the world. He stepped inside. The air dropped to ice. His breath vanished. His mind grew quiet. The force here did not speak. It watched. Andeddu's tomb was not like the others. No banners, no throne, no signs of legacy. It was not a monument. It was a prison, built from will, sealed by fear, kept hidden, even from those who believed in him. The deeper Bane walked, the more the walls bled memory. They showed no images, but they felt alive, heavy with thought, layered with pain. This wasn't a tomb. It was a soul, and he was inside it. Bane slowed. The hallway ended. The ground widened into a chamber, lit by nothing. Still, he could see. The room wasn't dark. It was empty. So empty, it made his mind ache. No dust, no sound, no scent, just stillness. So complete, it didn't feel natural. The Holocron pulsed, not with light, with pressure, a heartbeat. Without a body, he stepped forward, and the tomb breathed. The walls rippled, the floor sighed, the ceiling groaned, like lungs remembering how to inhale. Andeddu was not dead. Not here. His body had vanished ages ago, consumed by ritual, burned away by the cost of what he tried to become. But his will remained, not as a ghost, not as a memory, as a presence, stitched into the silence itself. Bane felt his own thoughts slow, not from fear, from invasion. Something else was thinking with him, not above, not around, through him. A cold voice, not made of sound, whispered from the stone. "You came to learn." Bane didn't answer. The voice didn't care. "You opened the door. Now walk through it." Bane moved forward. The chamber brightened, but there were no lights. Just memory, made visible. Flashes, figures, pain. He saw rituals performed, with no regard for suffering. He saw bodies rot and rise again. He saw knowledge, so forbidden. The force itself looked away. And at the center of it all, a face without eyes, a voice without breath. Andeddu. Bane reached out. The memory reached back, and in that instant, the sanctum collapsed inward. Not physically, existentially. The room wasn't holding him. It was becoming him. Andeddu's essence, wrapped around his spine, pressed into his lungs, filled his blood with ash. The air screamed, the walls laughed, and Bane stood still, not resisting, not welcoming, just watching, because this was what he came for. Not a lesson, not a ritual, the confrontation with something older than even the Sith could name. The Holocron dimmed, and the tomb waited, because the dead king had returned, and he would not leave. Quietly, the silence didn't last. It never does. At first, it was just vibration, a pulse beneath the floor, too slow to be sound, too deep to be felt. Then came the breath, not his, the tomb's. Every wall expanded. Every stone exhaled. Like the air itself, remembered who it used to serve. And then the voice returned. Faint, patient, old enough to sound tired of eternity. Darth Bane. The sound crawled behind his name, dragged across his bones. It wasn't a question. It was recognition. He didn't answer. Not with words. He steadied his breath and waited. You came for power. The voice was everywhere. Above him, inside him, behind him. You think it can be taken. Bane frowned. He had studied Andeddu's techniques for months, learned his methods, understood his pride. But hearing the voice now was different. It wasn't memory. It was presence. I came for truth, he said quietly. The tomb answered, no one comes for truth. They come because they're afraid of what happens without it. The walls cracked, not from pressure, from memory. Images seeped from the fractures, hands reaching through time, ritual circles burning with violet flame, voices screaming for release. Andeddu's legacy wasn't knowledge, it was contagion. He had bound himself to the Force so completely that even the Force couldn't digest him. His essence lingered, like poison in the bloodstream of reality. Now it spoke again. I remember you. Bane felt the weight of that statement. Impossible, but undeniable. The air grew heavier, each breath harder to take. The tomb was testing him, feeling his fear, tasting his resolve. He didn't break. He couldn't, because he understood what Andeddu wanted. Not worship, not pity, recognition. The dead feared being forgotten, more than death itself. And Bane's presence had awakened that hunger again. He walked deeper, every step louder, every echo sharper. The darkness thickened, not absence of light, presence of thought. Andeddu's consciousness was everywhere. 1,000 minds compressed into one. It whispered things Bane had never told anyone. His doubts, his pain, his loneliness. It used his own voice to repeat them back. You killed your brothers, your masters, your faith. A pause, and you still kneel before ghosts. Bane's rage flickered. The tomb dimmed. The darkness reacted like a living organism. He felt its curiosity, its amusement. You have fire, it said. But fire always forgets. It burns itself first. Bane pressed forward. He would not be broken by echoes. The air tightened. His steps grew slower. He reached a vast chamber. In the center stood a sarcophagus. It was simple. No gold, no sigils, just stone. But the stone breathed. Each inhale rattled the dust. Each exhale hummed with life. He moved closer. The holocron pulsed in his hand. The voice followed. I gave them everything. Andeddu said. Power, secrets, eternity. They gave me fear. Bane stopped at the edge of the tomb. He felt the Force twist. You sealed yourself in, he whispered. I did not seal myself. Andeddu replied. They sealed me away. And in doing so, they preserved me. The lid cracked open. Not wide, just enough. Light seeped through the gap. Cold, blue, endless. Bane stared. There was no body, only shadow, shaped like a man. "I am not dead," the shadow said. "I am unfinished." The room trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling. Stone shifted beneath his feet. The sarcophagus lifted. Weightless, defiant. Andeddu's presence filled the chamber, like a storm reclaiming its sky. "You came for truth," he said. "Then you will become it." The force exploded. The tomb roared. And Darth Bane fell into the memory of a god refusing to die. The chamber did not explode. It unfolded. Walls that were stone became light. Light that was memory became pain. Bane fell, but there was no ground, only the echo of falling itself. He landed in silence. Not physical silence, something deeper. The kind of quiet that forgets sound ever existed. Andeddu's presence was everywhere. Not above, not below, all around. Inside, "You sought immortality," the voice said. "Now, you will understand it." The air shimmered. Images formed from shadow, not illusions. Fragments. Bane saw them. Lives stacked like layers of glass. Moments from centuries ago, replaying endlessly. Andeddu's experiments. His failures. His agony. Bodies burning. Souls twisting. The force screaming as it was forced to obey. Each memory was a prison cell. Each cell contained a version of him, and all of them were still awake. "Do you see?" Andeddu whispered. "This is what you wanted." Bane tried to speak, but his voice disappeared. He reached out with the force. It recoiled. It didn't trust him anymore. He understood now. The Holocron hadn't just stored knowledge. It had trapped will. Fragments of thought, stitched together so tightly, they could never fade. Andeddu hadn't conquered death. He had duplicated himself, until death had nowhere to go. Each piece wanted to live. Each fought the others, an eternal war between memories. That was immortality, not freedom. Infection. Bane's mind began to fracture. He saw faces that weren't his. He heard voices that remembered killing him. Every time he blinked, he was someone else. Every blink, another lifetime. He saw the mountain of Prakith, swallowed by rebellion. He saw Korriban's sand turn to glass. He saw himself, kneeling before a throne, made of whispers. Andeddu's laughter echoed through it all. "You think life is power," he said, "but power without end is torment without silence." The light around him dimmed. The walls returned. The sarcophagus waited. The shadow rose from it, no longer formless. A man's shape, pale, hollow-eyed, half smoke, half memory. Andeddu stood where he had died. He wasn't ghost or god. He was will given shape by refusal. The force trembled. Even the darkness showed respect. Bane stepped forward. He wasn't afraid. He had seen death too many times to fear its persistence. "You are a relic," he said. "You clung to what should end." Andeddu's smile was almost human. And yet here you stand, he whispered, doing the same. The words pierced deeper than the Force could block, because he was right. Bane had destroyed the Sith to rebuild them. He had murdered to preserve an idea. He had chased power to escape loss. He was no different. Andeddu stepped closer. His form flickered, each movement shifting between centuries. Immortality, he said, is not a gift to be claimed. It is a debt to be paid. He reached toward Bane, not to strike, to touch. The contact was unbearable. Every thought in Bane's mind collapsed inward. Every secret he'd buried became visible. Andeddu saw it all. The betrayals, the fears, the cracks in his strength. He never admitted existed. Now you know, Andeddu said softly. You cannot become eternal without losing the right to be yourself. Bane pulled away. The air screamed again. He summoned the Force. In desperation, lightning burst from his hands, splitting the tomb in two. The shadow broke apart, but didn't die. It swirled around him, coiling, laughing. Andeddu's voice rose once more. You cannot destroy what you are becoming. Bane fell to his knees. The room faded to darkness. The whisper followed. Not mockery, not anger, acceptance. You will understand one day, when you no longer remember which voice is yours. Then silence returned. The tomb stilled. The air was empty again. But deep inside, the echo remained. And Darth Bane realized the Holocron had never truly opened. It had opened him. The light returned slowly, faint, flickering, unsteady. Bane awoke on the floor. The air was cold. The stone beneath him hummed. He was alive, but not alone. Something inside him was breathing that wasn't him. He rose to his knees. His thoughts came slowly. Every idea had a second echo behind it. He blinked. The tomb blurred. His vision split. For an instant, he saw two of himself. One standing, one still lying where he fell. Then both became one again. Andeddu was gone, but his voice was not. It whispered through the walls, through his blood, through the Force itself. Life is the lie. Bane ignored it. He had no time for riddles. He staggered toward the exit. Each step felt heavier, not from exhaustion, from memory. Every shadow in the corridor seemed to follow him. Every whisper spoke his name. The tomb did not want him to leave, but it didn't stop him, because part of him had already stayed behind. He reached the surface. The wind hit like a wave. Hot, dry, real. He fell to one knee, gasping. The stars above seemed closer, brighter. Watching, he could feel Korriban. Watching too, the planet recognized him now. Not as visitor, not as student, as heir. He had survived, but survival felt different now. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like inheritance. He turned toward the valley. Every tomb looked different, every shadow deeper. He could sense them. The ancient lords, the restless dead, the remnants of history. that still called this world home. They were silent, but they were aware, and somewhere beneath them, Andeddu waited, not defeated, not free, merged. Their connection wasn't broken. It was complete. When Bane reached his ship, he paused. His reflection stared back at him through the glass. The face was his. The eyes were not. For a moment, they flickered blue, then red, then normal. He touched the glass. It pulsed. Just once, he heard the whisper again. Calm, measured, closer. You carry me now. He wanted to deny it, but the truth had already written itself into his bones. The ritual had not failed. It had succeeded too well. Immortality was not something you gained. It was something you shared. Andeddu had not possessed him. He had joined him. Their minds overlapped. Their knowledge intertwined. Their will became one scar across the Force. Bane closed his eyes. The stars pulsed in rhythm. With his heartbeat, he could feel eternity pressing against the edge of his mind. Cold, infinite, unforgiving. He whispered softly, "I am no king." The answer came from within. "You are what remains." He entered his ship. The engines roared to life. Korriban shrank behind him, but the silence didn't return. It followed, inside the hum of the ship, inside the movement of the Force, inside him. When he looked at the Holocron, resting in his hand, it no longer looked old. It looked alive. Its glow matched his pulse. Each heartbeat, a reminder. He had wanted to rule the future. Now the past ruled him. The galaxy outside his window looked unchanged, but he could feel how different it had become. Because the dead king was awake again. Not in the tomb, in the bloodstream of the dark side. Every whisper of ambition, every echo of greed, every hunger for eternity. That was him now. That was them. Andeddu had never left. He had only changed shape. He had simply found another voice to speak through. Bane exhaled. The sound carried both of them. Two souls, one will. He whispered one last time. To no one. To himself. To the Force. Immortality isn't living forever. He looked at the stars. Cold, distant, endless. It's never being allowed to die. They never left. They only hid. For centuries after Andeddu's body vanished from Korriban, his name became a whisper, a myth, a warning. But for some, it became a prayer. In the ruins of forgotten temples, beneath the cities of crumbling empires, they waited. The cult, the malevolence. What remained of Andeddu's followers did not seek power, not the kind the Sith craved. They sought memory, purity, continuity. They believed that the flesh was weak, but the name was immortal. Andeddu was not just their god. He was their anchor to forever. Every year, in silence, they reenacted his ritual. The transference of essence. The deathless cycle. Most failed. Some died screaming. Others did not die at all, but did not live either. They were stored, preserved in chemical jars, or bound in coffin prisons beneath the soil of Prakith. No tomb was sacred. No vault was empty. All places touched by the dark side were watched, guarded, preserved by them. They carved his glyph into the stones of Nar Shadda's sewer walls. They burned his sigil into the bones of the dead on Ziost. They hollowed out their own faces and wore bone masks that never blinked. The galaxy thought the cult was dead. The Jedi never even knew it existed. But they endured, because endurance was all they were built for. They weren't led by a council. They didn't operate in armies. They moved like mold, feeding on decay, waiting for breath. All they needed was the right crack in the galaxy. And that crack came when the Rule of Two was born. Andeddu's teachings, so long buried, resurfaced in Darth Bane's hand. The Holocron's voice leaked into the Force like oil. It called to them, across systems, across empires, across lives. They didn't speak to one another. They didn't need to. They dreamed the same dreams. Of Prakith before the Republic, of Andeddu on his throne, refusing to rot. They knew he was returning, not in flesh, but in fragments, shards of thought, slivers of will, scattered throughout the currents of the dark side. And wherever there was shadow, there was a fragment, a whisper, a trace. They began to move, not all at once, not like an army, like infection, one on Corellia, one in the ice beneath Ilum, one deep inside the vaults of Arcania, locked behind glass for study, by scholars who had no idea what they were looking at. The fragments of Andeddu's essence did not scream. They listened, waited, and when the minds around them grew curious, greedy, wounded, they slipped in. There was no grand ritual, no flash of lightning, no roar, just a change. A slow, cold smile where there hadn't been one before. A student who suddenly stopped sleeping, stopped speaking, but kept writing, kept drawing, the same symbol, again and again and again. A Sith acolyte who wandered the dune seas of Tatooine for 3 days and came back blind, but claimed he could still see through someone else's eyes. A senator who stopped aging, but started hearing voices. The galaxy didn't notice, because the galaxy was busy. Wars, invasions, rebellions, empires collapsing and rising again. But in the quiet places, where decay outlived structure, the cult was gathering. They weren't many. They never were. They didn't need numbers. They needed patience. Time was their religion. And in time, the Force would shift again. Another would come. Another seeker. Another Sith who believed in death, but feared it more. And when that seeker came, the cult would be waiting, with robes older than the Clone Wars, with holocrons sealed in sarcophagi, with skin that hadn't touched sunlight in 100 years. They were shadows of a shadow, and even if Andeddu was forgotten, they would make the galaxy remember, one mind at a time, one whisper at a time, one breath away from awakening. There are places in the galaxy where the dark side is not subtle, not hidden, not waiting. This is one of them. A beautiful world on the surface, blue skies, green oceans, a place that looks alive. But it isn't. It never was. Bis was a wound, a feeding ground for spirits that should have faded. And it became a haven for the cult that would not die. The malevolence knew what it was. They didn't fear it. They worshipped it. Bis was not a planet. It was a mirror, a perfect reflection of what Andeddu had taught them. A mask of beauty covering a core of rot. They called it the cradle, their new home, their second tomb. It started as whispers, a handful of followers from Prakith who had escaped the Jedi purge. They were tired, old, but they still dreamed of the Undying One. On Bis, their dreams turned into voices. The force there was thick, not like water, like syrup. It slowed thoughts, bent perception, fed on emotion. When they chanted the name of their king, they said it bled into the soil. When they burned offerings, they said the smoke curled into shapes. Eyes, grounds, teeth. Bis responded, not with storms, not with fire, but with hunger, and the malevolence obeyed it. They built catacombs beneath the surface. No entrances, no exits, only descent. The deeper they went, the more the air tasted like memory. Old, sweet, sour. They believed Andeddu was there, not in body, not in soul, but in will. The same will that once ruled Prakith. The same will that spoke from the Holocron. Bane had stolen. The same will that watched silently as the Sith Empire rose and fell and rose again. The cult did not need proof. They had faith. They had wounds in their minds where his voice had once lived. Some were mad, some were empty, some were so calm. They frightened even the other Sith, but all of them believed. And in their belief, they changed the planet. Not physically, spiritually. The force on Bis became hostile, not to the dark, but to anything else. Animals grew still, then stopped breeding, then disappeared. Birds flew away and never returned. Even the Sith Lords, who visited later, who sensed the power in the ground, they left quickly, unsettled, because the dark side is rarely afraid. But on Bis, it was not alone. Something else was there. Something older, not evil, not cruel, endless. And that terrified them. The cult expanded, not in numbers, in reach. Their chants echoed through the lower layers of hyperspace. They etched runes into the minds of force-sensitive children. Not words, not thoughts, just presence. Some Jedi began to hear voices in the middle of training. Some turned to meditation and never woke up. No one traced it to Bis. No one even asked, because Bis was quiet, and quiet is never questioned. The cult did not raise banners. They did not fight wars. They infected. An archivist on Ossus began writing in languages no one taught him. A technician on Malastare ripped out her own eyes, but claimed she could see better now. A bounty hunter on Nar Shaddaa muttered to a cube that wasn't there. These were not accidents. They were seeds planted by a cult that no longer sought resurrection. They sought saturation. They wanted the entire galaxy to breathe Andeddu, to speak without knowing they were echoing him, to live without realizing whose will moved through them. And on Bis, beneath the poisoned sky, they practiced the old rites, the forbidden ones, rituals Andeddu had hidden, even from his Sith peers. They did not always survive, but survival was no longer the goal. The body meant nothing, only the voice, only the vision, only the hunger to live forever. Andeddu had become more than memory. He had become method, and Bis was his laboratory. The sky above still looked beautiful, but beneath it, the galaxy's oldest sickness was learning how to spread. They no longer called themselves Sith, not entirely. The word felt small, temporary, bound to dynasties and wars. Andeddu's followers wanted something greater, something without end. They began to write, not scrolls, not datapads. They carved their words into stone, into bone, into their own flesh. Every wound was a verse, every scar a lesson. It became known as the doctrine of the Undying Will. No one agreed who wrote it. Some said it was Andeddu himself, whispering through the Force. Others believed it was collective memory, his will living inside those who believed hard enough. It didn't matter. The words spread, and they were beautiful, in the way poison is beautiful. The first verse was always the same. Death is the lie. Memory is the truth. The flesh betrays. The will remains. They recited it like breath. Slow, measured, unending. The cult stopped worshipping Andeddu as a man. They worshipped him as process. He was no longer the king of Prakith. He was the law of continuance. They built their faith around the idea that thought was stronger than life. That consciousness itself was the only thing the Force ever truly feared, because it could not destroy it. When the Jedi died, they became one with the Force. When the Sith died, they screamed and vanished. But Andeddu stayed. That was their gospel, their proof. They saw themselves as heirs to his endurance. The malevolence was no longer a cult. It was a network, cells hidden on worlds, both ancient and new. Each taught a different version of the same lie, until it became truth. Some preached that Andeddu had become the Force itself. Others claimed he was watching from inside the holocrons, waiting for vessels strong enough to hold him. But all agreed on one thing, that death was rebellion, and rebellion was weakness. They did not mourn their dead. They recycled them. The bodies of the faithful were drained of blood and filled with alchemical fluid. The eyes were sewn open, the mouths sealed shut. They became sentinels, vessels for his essence, standing motionless in the catacombs of Bis and Prakith. To the cult, this was mercy, because to be still was to be eternal. They began to speak less and less. Their chants became vibrations. Their rituals became soundless. Even their thoughts aligned into a single rhythm. One pulse, one hum, one will. Across the galaxy, Force sensitives began to feel it. At first, it was confusion, then fear. Something vast, something ancient, moving beneath the current. Not light, not dark, something older. The Jedi archives called it residual resonance, a byproduct of countless Sith deaths. But that wasn't true. It was Andeddu, still teaching, still whispering. Through memory, through obsession, through will, he had transcended language, transcended doctrine. He had become inertia. Even when the cult splintered, the idea survived. The idea always survives. The malevolence fractured into three orders. The first believed Andeddu would return in body. They sought flesh strong enough to resurrect him. The second believed he already lived inside them, that every breath they took was his breath continuing. The third believed he no longer needed flesh at all, that the galaxy itself was his vessel, and that the Force was now haunted by his presence. They called themselves the Eternal Will, and they didn't hide. They didn't need to, because their creed was invisible. It lived in words repeated at funerals, in thoughts of fear before sleep, in every whispered wish to never die. That was his true immortality. Not power, not conquest, influence, unseen, unending, undeniable. Andeddu had become the prayer. Every living thing eventually said, "I don't want to end." And the dark side listened, because that was what it had always been. Not hatred, not greed, fear, made holy. Dromund Kaas was a scar on the galaxy, a wound that refused to heal. It was not a place for life, not truly. Lightning never stopped, clouds never broke. The ground shook even when nothing moved. And beneath it all, there was something watching. The Sith built temples here, then abandoned them, then built again and again, as if they couldn't stop digging, as if they knew something was buried that should not be touched. They were right. Long before the old empire fled to this world, before Vitiate claimed it as his throne, before the temples or the tombs, a single ship crashed into the jungle. Its name was lost, its purpose unknown, but inside it was a holocron, stone-faced, sharp-edged, ancient beyond measure. It carried only one voice, Andeddu's. The Sith who found it called it cursed, because it didn't teach power. It taught silence, not control, but patience. It didn't burn like other dark side relics. It hummed low, like thunder beneath the sea. They buried it beneath the foundations of their temple, hoping to forget it. They never did. Over time, acolytes began to hear voices, not commands, not rage, just fragments. I live. I wait. I remember. Some tried to destroy the holocron. They failed. Some tried to listen. They went mad. But a few wrote down what they heard. Not instructions, but memories. And in those memories, they found fear. Not fear of death, fear of forgetting. Andeddu had stored pieces of his essence inside this holocron, but not like the others. He didn't record teachings. He didn't share rituals. He gave only fragments, moments, breaths, a glimpse of a throne room in Prak City, the sound of boots, marching through dust, the last breath of a traitor, choked without a hand raised. He gave feelings, rage without words, loneliness without tears, hope that something might endure longer than pain. This was the last fragment, not of power, but of self. It was not meant to be studied. It was meant to be felt. And in time, the Sith who did feel it changed. They stopped calling themselves lords. They began calling themselves keepers, not of knowledge, but of memory. They built rooms with no entrances, chambers with no doors, places where only thought could pass. And inside these rooms, they meditated on what it meant to remain. They believed that Andeddu's spirit was not seeking rebirth. He had already lived, already died, already returned. What he wanted now was remembrance, to be known, to be carried, not in name, but in feeling. And so, deep beneath the surface of Drummond Cars, the holocron was sealed, in a vault of obsidian, surrounded by statues, with no faces, not to honor him, to erase him, because in forgetting the face, they believed they could keep the soul pure, unanchored, unbound, free to drift, forever. Some say the Empire forgot it was there. Others say the vault still opens, once every 1,000 days, just enough to let one whisper out, one memory, I lived. And somewhere, a child dreams of a voice they've never heard. Somewhere, a dying Sith refuses to let go. Somewhere, the Force trembles, not in fear, but in discomfort. Because even now, centuries later, across light years and lifetimes, Darth Andeddu is still waiting to be remembered, not as a king, not as a god, as a thought that never died, as the last fragment of a soul that refused to fade. The fortress was silent, but something was awake inside. Buried beneath the ash-covered cliffs of Prakith, locked behind ancient seals and Sith runes, the tomb of Darth Andeddu had never been fully still. Time had forgotten his name, but time had never touched his will. Long after his flesh had crumbled into dust, his voice remained. It drifted between the stone walls like smoke. It clawed at the minds of those foolish enough to come near. It whispered the promise that had made him a god. I am the only truth. Andeddu had been called many things. A madman, a heretic, a tyrant. But even his enemies could never explain how he lived on. His holocron had passed from hand to hand, from fallen Sith acolytes to secret cults to the great Darth Bane himself. Each had seen visions. Each had heard screams. And each had felt the cold grip of something that should not be. The Jedi refused to speak of it. The Sith pretended to forget it. But in the deepest chambers of the one Sith stronghold, Darth Wylark remembered. He had seen what power Andeddu left behind, and he knew where it slept. Prakith was a dead world. The cities were ruins. The air tasted of rust and silence. But even here, in the bones of an ancient kingdom, Andeddu's presence was alive. Beneath the stone sarcophagus, beneath the altar carved with faces of agony, there were still echoes. Not of memory, but of thought. The dark side had rooted itself into the very rock, not just as energy, but as personality. Andeddu's soul had fused with the crypt that held him. Not floating, not wandering, watching, waiting. When Darth Wyalok landed his ship in the shadow of the tomb, the winds did not greet him. The planet seemed to hold its breath. He walked alone through the fractured gates, armed not with an army, but with knowledge. He carried the words of Darth Krayt, a dying emperor clinging to existence. Andeddu had conquered death once. Perhaps he could teach it again. But Wyalok did not seek to beg. He came to command. That was his first mistake. Even in silence, the air felt heavy. The shadows moved without light. Wyalok's boots echoed through chambers that had not known footsteps in 100 years. He saw murals of burning cities, altars crusted with dried blood, statues of the Undying King, his eyes hollow, his mouth carved into a scream. But there was no body, only ash, and bones too clean to rot naturally. The deeper he went, the less real it all felt. His thoughts blurred, his pulse slowed, and then, at the heart of the tomb, he heard the voice. Not aloud, but inside him. It did not ask questions. It did not beg. It judged. Another thief comes to steal what cannot be earned. Wyalok did not flinch. He had trained for this. He had read the histories, studied the rites, memorized every ritual Andeddu had left behind. But no scroll could prepare him for this. Because it wasn't the voice that broke him. It was the feeling that Andeddu had never left. That his mind, his rage, his will had never passed into the Force. It had stayed, burning, starving, insane. This was no ordinary spirit. No memory trapped by regret. This was a consciousness too stubborn to die, too angry to sleep. And Wyalok realized something too late. He had not come to speak to a dead man. He had come to challenge a god. And in that tomb, under stone older than the Republic itself, he would learn what it meant to confront the Sith who would not die. The air in the tomb thickened. Each breath scraped his throat. Each step felt heavier. The deeper Wyalok walked, the more he felt it. The pressure, not gravity. Will, the will of something ancient, something endless. The Holocron had promised power, but the walls promised judgment. He reached the central chamber, the heart of Andeddu's kingdom of stone. The sarcophagus waited in silence. A massive block of obsidian, etched with lines that pulsed faintly red, like veins beneath skin. Dust hung in the air like smoke. Symbols glowed dimly along the floor. Sith runes of preservation, of immortality, of torment. Wyalok raised a torch of crimson flame. It flickered weakly. The darkness didn't recede. It absorbed the light. And then, the whisper, "You came too soon." Wyalok froze. The voice was neither loud nor distant. It was inside him, close, intimate. "I have waited centuries for a mind strong enough to understand." He steadied himself. "You are Andeddu." The air trembled. "No, I was Andeddu. Now I am what remains." When the flesh forgets itself, the shadows bent, The room shifted, as though space itself was breathing in rhythm with the voice. "You seek my secrets," it continued. "You think you can take them, but you cannot take what has no end." Wyalok stepped closer. "I do not seek, I command." The whisper laughed, a hollow, cracking sound, like stone grinding against bone. "Command." The word echoed, each echo deeper than the last. "You command nothing." The flame in Wyalok's hand went out. The darkness moved. He felt it crawl along his mind, sliding through his thoughts, like fingers through water. It found his fears, his doubts, his loyalty to Krayt. It touched them all. Then it spoke again. "Your master is dying. You serve rot, and yet you come here to steal eternity." Wyalok clenched his fists. "My loyalty is not weakness. It is," the voice said, "because loyalty ends." The walls cracked. Dust fell like ash. The sarcophagus pulsed brighter. "I ruled before your bloodline crawled from the mud. I commanded legions that worshipped death. I made the Force my servant. And when death came for me, I made it kneel." The voice shifted. Closer now, clearer. It wasn't echoing anymore. It was whispering directly into his ear. "Do you think you can do the same?" Wyalok's eyes burned violet. He summoned the Force, projecting his will outward. The air rippled. The shadows screamed. The voice went quiet. Then laughter returned, softer. "Good. You have anger. But anger is a flame, and flames always starve." He looked toward the sarcophagus. The lid was cracked open. A thin line of blue light seeped through it. Cold, steady, alive. He approached it slowly. Every step hurt. The air itself fought him. He reached out his hand. The stone hummed. His fingers touched it. The light bled into his skin. It burned. Not pain, but memory. He saw images flash before him. Prakith under siege. A king screaming as his people betrayed him. A body burning. A soul refusing to leave. Andeddu's last thought before death. "I will not end." Wyalok ripped his hand away. The vision stopped. The chamber fell silent. But he could feel it now. Andeddu wasn't speaking from beyond. He was speaking through the Force itself. He had never crossed over. He had stayed, anchored by rage, sustained by fear, and now that same will was studying him. "You are not ready," it whispered, "but you will be." Wyalok straightened his spine. "I came to take what you cannot give. Then take it." Andeddu answered, "And see what becomes of you." The sarcophagus burst open. Light filled the tomb, and the king who would not die rose again. In mind, in memory, in defiance of everything that should have stayed buried. Light filled the tomb, but it was not light that belonged to the living. It pulsed like memory. It breathed like thought. And in that light, a figure began to form. Not solid, not spirit, something in between. The shape of a king, wearing a crown of shadow. Darth Andeddu. His eyes glowed blue and hollow. His voice came from everywhere, layered over itself, echoing as if 1,000 mouths spoke the same words at once. "You stand in my grave," he said. and you dare to speak of taking my power." Wyalok did not kneel. He had never knelt to anyone but Krayt, and even that had been calculation, not faith. He looked into the ghost's eyes and saw galaxies of torment. Andeddu had not conquered death. He had become its prisoner. "I don't need your permission," Wyalok said. "I only need your secret." The air trembled. The voice replied, softly, almost kind. "You think knowledge will save you. You think will can defy oblivion." The figure moved closer. The light flickered, and the walls warped like heat against stone. "You are nothing but dust, bound by another man's dream. You serve a corpse, and call it destiny." Wyalok's jaw tightened. The insult did not wound him. The truth beneath it did. He could see Darth Krayt dying. He could feel his master's weakness, and the galaxy waited for the next tyrant to fall. That was why he had come, not to learn, to replace. Andeddu smiled. "You think you are different, but every Sith is the same story, told with a new name." The force around them twisted. The chamber bled shadow. Wyalok felt it crawl across his skin, burning, freezing, devouring. His thoughts fractured. His memories unfolded. He saw himself as a child, studying in the ruins of Relg, alone, hungry, brilliant. He saw the faces of the weak he had crushed beneath his rise. He saw Krayt's withered body, and his own reflection inside his master's dying eyes. Andeddu showed him everything. "This is immortality," the voice said. "Endless self, endless mirror, endless hunger." Wyalok screamed, not from pain, from clarity, because he understood now. Andeddu was not offering him life. He was offering him a cage. The light turned crimson. The tomb began to shake. Stone cracked. Symbols burned. Wyalok drew in the force. Every ounce of rage, every fragment of discipline, every word of Krayt's teachings ignited inside him. "You call this power," he shouted. "You call this victory. You are trapped in the memory of yourself." The spirit flinched. The light dimmed for the first time. "Silence," Andeddu hissed. "I am the beginning of the Sith. I am the law that even death obeys." "No," Wyalok said. "You are the proof that the Sith can rot." He raised his hand. The Force answered. Energy rippled through the chamber. Statues exploded. Ash rose in spirals. The two wills collided, not with sound, with silence. Every whisper died. Every heartbeat vanished. The force became a single note, so loud it felt like absence. Andeddu pressed forward. The air warped with his fury. He poured centuries of rage into a single command. "Kneel." Wyalok staggered. His knees buckled. The ground groaned beneath him. But he didn't fall. He smiled. Because he saw it. The weakness, the fear behind the voice. Andeddu was terrified. Not of him, of ending again. "You fear silence," Wyalok whispered. "You fear the one thing that can't be controlled." He gathered his will. He pushed back, not with hatred, with clarity. "You were the first to live beyond death," he said. "And I will be the first to erase you from it." The tomb screamed. The light shattered. The spirit howled, not in defeat, but in disbelief. And then it cracked. The figure flickered once, twice, and began to unravel. "I cannot die," it whispered. "Yes," Wylock said softly. "You can." He unleashed his mind, a storm of raw will. Not energy, not fury, conviction. And the Undying King finally broke. His voice echoed through the chamber one last time, fading into nothing. "You think you've won." Then silence. Real silence. The tomb went still. The light went out, and Darth Wylock stood alone. In the darkness, where a god had died. The tomb was silent. No breath. No wind. Not even the echo of thought. Just stone. Dust. And Darth Wylock. He stood there, heart still racing, mind still burning. But the presence was gone. Andeddu had vanished. No whispers. No resistance. No more tests of will. Wylock allowed himself to believe it. The threat was ended. The ancient soul erased. Not defeated. Not imprisoned. Erased. A Sith could not show relief. But deep inside, a part of him loosened its grip. He approached the Holocron again. Its edges no longer pulsed. Its light was dim. Wylock lifted it carefully, hands steady, breath slow. The secrets were his now. The rituals, the transference of essence, the steps to eternal consciousness. It was all real. But it had a price, a terrible one. Andeddu had paid it. With centuries of madness, Wylock would not repeat that fate. He would use the knowledge, but he would never be used by it. He turned away from the altar. The chamber no longer resisted him. No illusions, no pain, no flickering shadows, only cold rock, only silence. He walked with measured steps, back through the broken archway, past shattered statues, cracked walls, and burned runes. He climbed toward the surface, where his ship waited, where the stars waited, where Krayt waited. The mission was complete. And yet, as his foot touched the upper threshold, he paused. Something was wrong. He looked back into the tomb. The shadows were still gone. No sound stirred. But there was a feeling, faint, like a breath against the back of the neck, like a word that hadn't yet been spoken. He told himself it was nothing. Residual emotion, the Force playing tricks, a mind strained from battle. He stepped into the light of the stars. He sealed the tomb behind him. He walked toward his vessel, without looking back again. But something followed, not in space, not in sound, not in vision, in thought. It crept through the edge of his perception, like ink in water. No form, no voice, just weight. The Holocron trembled once in his hand, then stilled. He told himself it was just memory. He told himself the soul had died. He repeated the truth, until it hardened into belief. But Darth Wylock had made a mistake. He believed that erasure was an act of strength. He thought that silence meant surrender. But Andeddu had lived for centuries, in fragments, in whispers, in fear. He had died before. More than once, he had been betrayed, buried, burned, and still, he returned. Because belief cannot erase what lives beneath it. not when the belief is thin, not when the shadow is old. In the halls of the one Sith, Warlock would rise, he would lead. He would whisper Krait's name, like a sacred flame. But sometimes, when he stood alone in the archives, he would feel cold, for no reason. He would hear footsteps, in chambers with no doors. He would find holocrons, moved slightly from where he left them. And he would wake from dreams that were not his. Dreams of a crown, of a throne, of a voice that hissed. Without sound, you were never strong enough. And though he buried it, though he denied it, though he silenced the archives, the truth never left him. He hadn't erased Andeddu. He had awakened something deeper, something quieter. And in time, long after Warlock's own body turned to dust, the tomb would open again. Another would enter, another would seek, and the whispers would begin once more. Because the Sith, who learned to live forever, had never truly died. He had only been waiting. The Holocron was lost, buried beneath the ashes of forgotten wars. Its edges cracked, its voice fractured, but the hunger inside it never stopped whispering. Centuries had passed since Darth Warlock silenced Andeddu's spirit, and yet he was never truly gone. Because Andeddu had prepared for this. He knew betrayal was coming. He knew the Sith would turn on him. They always did. So he scattered fragments of himself in rituals, in scrolls, in the blood-soaked chants of cultists who called him Father Death. The Jedi believed they destroyed him. The Sith believed they consumed him. But neither side ever understood what he truly was. He wasn't just a man. Not anymore. He was memory. He was doctrine. He was the fear behind every Sith whisper, that death still waited even for them. After Korriban fell silent, Andeddu's holocron vanished into the deep core. Some say it was locked away by Warlock himself, buried in a vault, hidden under blood seals and illusion. Others believe it traveled, carried by Sith agents who didn't even know what they held. But the holocron was patient. It always had been. It waited as empires rose and fell. It waited as the rule of two twisted the galaxy's fate. It waited through the long nights of exile, when the Sith lived in shadows. And then, it was found again. Not by a Sith, not by a Jedi, by a collector, a nameless being who walked the edge of history buying lost secrets, trading in ancient curses. He didn't know what he had. He didn't understand the warnings. He opened the holocron and screamed, and Andeddu's voice poured out like venom. Not words, not instructions, just pain, just rage, just the will of a king who refused to fade. The collector vanished. His ship was found drifting above Malachor, its systems melted from the inside out. No crew, no trace. Only the holocron, waiting again. Eventually, it was taken by a Sith cult on Taris. They called themselves the Night Route. They believed death was a passage, and Andeddu was the door. They bathed in toxin. They mutilated their faces. They starved themselves until visions came. And in those visions, they saw him, the Undying One, crowned in bone, sitting on a throne of worms. He told them the truth, that there was no peace, no afterlife, only survival, that the soul could be anchored, that the body was just a shell, that immortality wasn't a gift, It was a war. The cult obeyed. They turned on each other, slaughtered the weak, drank from the veins of their dead. They thought it would bring him back, but Andeddu never returned. Because that wasn't the goal. He didn't want resurrection. He wanted memory. Every death in his name made him stronger. Every drop of blood spilled in fear of him fed the shadow he left behind. The cult collapsed. Their bodies were found in a circle, eyes burned out, mouths sewn shut. And in the center, the Holocron, untouched, unopened, still humming. Andeddu had become something more than Sith, more than legend. He had become an infection buried in the Sith code, encoded into every ambition to escape death. Even Darth Bane, even Darth Plagueis, they all felt it. That pull, that promise. They studied the same rituals. They echoed the same lies. They thought they were in control. But they were only repeating what Andeddu had already become. His legacy wasn't power. It was obsession. An endless hunger disguised as knowledge. A whisper that said, "You don't have to die." The Holocron changed hands again. Stolen, recovered, stolen again. Passed between Sith inquisitors, bounty hunters, exiles. Each time it surfaced, it left silence behind. Ships destroyed. Vaults melted. Entire archives reduced to ash. And every time someone tried to understand it, it showed them a glimpse of him. A pale face, a withered crown, eyes that had seen the beginning of time and refused to blink. Andeddu was gone, but he was never dead. He was waiting, watching, and in the dark, forgotten corners of the galaxy, he was still being worshipped. It should have ended with Bane, but it didn't. The Holocron of Darth Andeddu did not vanish into the archives. It did not rot in the tomb where it was first pried loose. Instead, it drifted, from hand to hand, from lie to lie, from master to fool, and with every retelling, the truth inside it grew louder. The Sith called it many things. A tool, a relic, a trap, but in truth, it was none of those. It was a wound that never closed. Some Sith tried to destroy it. Others locked it away. A few, the bold or the desperate, tried to unlock it completely. None succeeded. Not really. Because the Holocron was not just a vault of secrets. It was a prison. And inside that prison, Darth Andeddu still whispered. There were whispers on Malachor. Rumors during the new Sith Wars. Some said his cult returned in the unknown regions. Others believed Andeddu's knowledge seeded the very roots of Sith alchemy. None could prove it, but all feared it. Even the Jedi. Especially the Jedi. Because Jedi knew the Force. They knew how it moved. How it flowed through life and death. But this was something else. A distortion. A shadow that moved without form. A presence that bled into tombs, into minds, into memory. Not like a ghost. Not like a Sith spirit. Worse, this was a will that refused to fade. A thought that refused to die. The Holocron carried it. But it wasn't the source. Andeddu was. And even now, even centuries after Wyalok crushed his soul, there were signs. An acolyte in the deep core spoke in tongues. A Sith on Zyast dreamed of burning ice. A ruined altar on Taris glowed with forbidden runes ones not seen since Prakith. Coincidence? No Sith believed in coincidence. There were those who began to ask again, who began to search, not for Andeddu, but for what he left behind, the doctrine of eternity, the hidden fragments, the rituals unfinished. In time, these whispers reached a new place, a place not mapped, not remembered, not alive. Exegol. There, in the dark, his name returned, not as a legend, but as a guide. Some say the cults that survived Andeddu's fall were drawn to Exegol by fate. Others say they were called. Andeddu's voice was gone, but his will wasn't. It had become something deeper, something colder, a seed buried in the Force itself, one that found new roots in broken minds. The acolytes of the beyond, the remnants of the malevolence, even the Sith eternal, they all spoke of immortality, but not like the Jedi feared, not spiritual peace, not balance. No, this was something different. The rejection of death, the bending of the Force to sustain oneself, a refusal, a rebellion, a curse, and in their hidden rituals, Andeddu's teachings returned, not by name, but by effect. They recited the old rites, transference, soul binding, essence echo. They didn't know where they came from, but the power worked, and that was enough. It always is. That's what immortality becomes. Not a crown, not a gift, a slow infection, a haunting idea, one that wears 1,000 faces, but has only one origin. Andeddu never wanted worship. He wanted to be remembered, and that is exactly what he got. Even now, as the Sith change names, change masks, change shapes, the shadow remains, the memory persists, because when one Sith learns to return from death, the galaxy becomes sick, and no matter how many times the Holocron is sealed, or buried, or forgotten, it always finds someone broken, someone afraid, someone who thinks death is unfair. And that's all it takes. One whisper, one dream, one Sith, to carry the curse forward. And so the Holocron waits, not for power, not for glory, but for a moment of fear, because that's when the voice speaks loudest. Andeddu's legacy is not a lesson, it is a disease, and there is no cure, only belief, and belief is immortal. They called it the Rule of Two, but it began with a question whispered in the dark. What if death could be defeated? What if power could be passed forever? Darth Bane did not invent that question. He only dared to answer it. He stood alone beneath a shattered sky. The Jedi were gone. The Sith were gone. But the Holocron still whispered. Andeddu's voice, ancient, cold, unrelenting. It spoke of spirit transference, of dark resurrection, of living forever, through pain. Bane did not flinch. He listened. He studied. He believed, not in immortality of the body, but of the line, the legacy, the will to continue. Andeddu's teaching became the seed of Bane's design. He rewrote the Sith. One master, one apprentice, power that would never rot in endless councils, only pass from worthy hand to worthy hand, a living chain of destruction. But the curse came with it. Not all apprentices obeyed. Not all masters let go. Andeddu's name, once buried, began to spread again. Through stolen datapads, lost tombs, dreams that didn't end. Some Sith forgot his warnings. Others worshipped them. On Korriban, on Ambria, in the secret temples of Malachor, his voice crept through stone. Dark rituals performed in silence. Holocrons locked in vaults, eyes that blinked when no one watched. Each century, another Sith would find him. Each century, he whispered the same promise. That death was a lie. That those who bowed to him could escape the grave. They never did. But his legend grew stronger with every death. Even in the time of Darth Plagueis, there were cults who traced their lineage to him. Whispers of a hidden order, devoted not to ruling the galaxy, but to mastering the soul. The Malevolence, a name that returned in dreams, a name that couldn't be killed. Darth Sidious dismissed them. He sought his own path to eternity, cloning, essence transfer, unnatural life. But even Palpatine, even the Emperor, studied the Holocrons. Andeddu was there, in the vaults of Bis, in the inner sanctum of Exegol, in the cracks between science and madness. They called them the Sith Eternal, a congregation of zealots who prayed to gods long dead. But they were wrong, because Andeddu was not dead. He was waiting. His thoughts were fragments now scattered across holocrons, scrolls, and corrupted Kyber. But the Sith who survived the purge remembered him. The Sith who walked beyond death spoke his name with reverence. Because he had done what none had done. He had made himself a myth while still alive. He had made death afraid. Andeddu's doctrine poisoned like a slow sickness. Not loud, not violent, but patient. It passed from Sith to Sith like a second voice in the mind, telling them to doubt, to fear, to betray, to kill, not just to win, but to remain. Immortality was no longer a dream. It was a demand, and the galaxy paid the price. On Exegol, the rituals were written in blood. The dark priests wore veils of silence. And in the center, hidden beneath layers of broken stars, a vault, locked since the time of Revan. Inside, a holocron, crowned in bone, burned in fire, Andeddu's last whisper, still waiting, still listening, for the next Sith who dared to believe that life must never end. For the next fool who thought they could master death without losing their soul. But no one does. They all think they're the first. They all think they're the last. And the Undying King waits. Forever. They searched for his name in ashes. They found it in blood. Thousands of years after his last breath, Darth Andeddu still whispered. Not through his voice, but through the voices of others. Dead kings do not shout. They are remembered in silence. On Prakith, the sky had long since turned gray. The great towers of the Malevolence had collapsed into the stone. No priest remained. No fire was lit. But his sigil, carved in the deep, still pulsed faintly in the dark. Unseen, undying. The Sith never let go of power. Even in death, they reach for it. And Andeddu had made reaching an art. His holocron passed between hands like a curse. Each who held it heard a different voice. To some, it was a teacher. To others, a prison. But always, it offered the same promise. You do not have to die. You do not have to fade. Jedi archivists tried to destroy it. They failed. Darth Bane tried to master it. He bled for it. Warlock tried to erase the spirit inside. But even then, it took root somewhere else. There were whispers of cults on the edges of space. Dromund cars. Biss. Even Exegol. Not armies, not fleets. Just shadows in black robes. Each reciting the same forgotten lines. Each claiming their god would rise again. They called him the Undying One, the Immortal King, the first to pierce the veil. But in truth, he was a man who refused to be erased. Andeddu's soul had no peace, not because of what was done to him, but because of what he had become. He had looked into the void, and the void had looked back, then blinked. His spirit was torn in too many directions. One fragment clung to Prakith, another haunted Korriban, a third screamed from the Holocron itself. None of them whole, none of them quiet. This was the cost of immortality. Not eternal life, but eternal unrest. The Jedi believed that letting go was peace. The Sith believed that holding on was power. Andeddu chose to hold on, too tightly, until there was nothing left of him but the grip. His teachings survived, in dark temples, in dead languages, in Sith who thought they could be the last to ever die. But every ritual of eternal life came from his shadow. Every secret of soul transference, every technique of essence preservation, was born from his sickness. He taught the galaxy how to cheat death, and in doing so, he cursed it with a question that could never be answered. What happens if you never let go? Some say Darth Krayt's one Sith were infected by that curse. Some say the cults on Exegol, the ones that built the final order, were his last echo. They spoke of Sith eternal, of spirits that would return. But none of them ever created anything new. They only repeated his lie. That death could be denied. In the end, Darth Andeddu had no legacy of love. No empire, no monument, only fear, only the lie that kept spreading after him. Long after his voice had faded, long after his bones had turned to dust, the Sith who studied his ways all believed the same thing, that they would do it better, that they would survive what he could not, that they would finish the work he began. But none of them did. Because the truth that Andeddu discovered and then buried was not how to live forever. It was this: that immortality is not a gift. It's a cage, and the ones who choose it never truly leave it. He still exists, not as a man, not even as a ghost, but as a sickness, a hunger passed down from master to apprentice. From Holocron to hand, from lie to legacy. There are ruins on Prakith that still bear his mark. There are Jedi tombs cracked open from within. And somewhere, in the space between death and life, he waits. Not because he wants to return, but because he never left. Some Sith are remembered in power, others in terror. Andeddu is remembered in whispers. He never won a war. He never ruled the galaxy. He never made the stars bow to his name. But in one way, he succeeded where none of them did. He was the first Sith to prove it could be done, that the soul could be torn from the body and chained to the dark forever, and that alone was enough to make him immortal.